Welcome to the Sega Lounge, where we celebrate our love for all things Sega, including the games, the music, and the community. I'm your host, KC. Join me as I talk to different guests and learn more about their projects and passion for Sega. Hello and welcome to the Sega Lounge. This is episode 242. It's a very special one. You can see I'm not alone. Yeah. This is going to be an exciting one. This is our Saturn 30th anniversary special. So it's very exciting for me, not only to be talking about this particular topic, but also to be joined by legends. What's better than a legend? I'm too tired to think of anything else. Let's just go. Icons, living legends of the Sega community and huge Saturn fans. So from my left to my right, we have Ravsieg. Hello.
So you're actually starting with the only guy that's not a legend here. Okay, cool.
Oh, I thought you were not a living legend.
Oh, you're telling
the
me
legend
I'm
part.
dead,
The problem is the legend part. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool.
Okay. How's it going?
Everything's all right. I'm hoping to actually say something useful today. Not entirely sure if that's gonna happen, but we'll keep our fingers crossed, ain't we?
If anything bad happens, I'll edit it out of the podcast later. It's okay.
Much appreciated.
No, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for the
we all
invitation.
know at this point, and our people should know that you're a big Saturn fan. So it makes sense to have you here for this special episode. So thank you.
You so much.
Appreciate you coming.
I do have a lot to say. Yeah.
I know. Okay, and also we have Dan, the Mega Driver. Hello.
KC, great to be back. And great to be sat next to Rav, another Saturn-loving legend. You can just feel the love for Sega's greatest console oozing out of this one.
Amazing.
There we
Oh,
go.
there we go. Representing. Okay. And last but certainly not least, we have James The SEGAHolic. Welcome, James.
Hello, guys. Hello, KC. Hello, Rav. It's great to be back. Been too long, mate. I was talking to Dan the other day about how long it's been. I think we were actually on the Sega Lounge in our first year, so it's been a while, man. So it's great to be back. Thank you very much for inviting us for such a special episode.
Thank you very much for accepting my invitation. And it's when I thought of who should I invite to this special episode, I sat hugging my Saturn pillow, and I thought, okay, I think I'll invite Rav and the SEGAGuys. Yeah, just an excuse to show this. But it's very comfy. It's very comfy. And if I fall asleep, it's because my pillow is very comfy. But actually, you guys were... Oh no! We have an imposter.
Get out of the way.
So yeah, you guys were the first people who came to mind when I thought of this episode. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary, like the original anniversary. Of course, don't come at us. Actually, if you want to, podcast at thesegalounge.com. It's okay. Hate mail that way. But we're celebrating the release of the Saturn in Japan. Okay, so that's why it's the 30th anniversary. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. You probably should know this by now. Not just you guys, Rav, Dan, and James, but the listeners. I'm not really a big Saturn fan. I missed out on that generation. And so this will be... No, because this is going to be... This is interesting for the format of this episode. Because this is going to be the actual first episode that I'm going to be Sega-educated. So this is a Sega education podcast episode. You are going to teach me the ways of the Sega Saturn. You are going to be like the Segata-san heroes of the Sega Lounge, and urge me to play. There you go, to play the Sega Saturn and explain to me why I missed out on a great Sega console. Okay, we have a kind of an outline here that we prepared beforehand, but obviously people who listen to this show know that it's probably gonna go out the window at some point, and we're just gonna banter and talk about our memories of the Saturn. But I want, in the spirit of educating me, I want to know more about you guys' experiences with not just the Saturn, but let's start with Sega and gaming. So the Saturn was released in Japan in 1994, so 30 years ago. Uh, at that time, or maybe 95 for the West, what were your experiences with Sega? Were you big Sega fans at the time? What were your expectations in terms of what the Saturn could bring to the table? So I'm going to start with James, putting you on the spot.
That's it, mate. I don't mind. As I said to Dan earlier, like this is going to be like just reliving the episode from the other night, which is great. But yeah, I mean, my kind of history with Sega did start with the Saturn. Well, started with a Game Gear. To be fair, I watched it in the 1994 World Cup final on a Sega Game Gear with the TV tuner. You know, I
That's
watched
awesome.
Roberto Baggio missed that penalty. You know, I watched that on a Game Gear. So, but yeah, so that was a kind of my early kind of like Sega kind of console memories. But in terms of playing Sega games, obviously the arcade kind of comes to mind. But before that, it was just the ports, the home ports on the home computers. So like your Atari ST and your Commodore Amiga. So like I wanted a Mega Drive, right? So like, so badly like, back in the day, and I grew up with a ZX Spectrum 128K plus two, and I had like loads and loads of games. Like they all came on audio tapes, and you could get games for like £2.99, £5.99, £9.99, and all the tapes were sat in these kind of leather black briefcases that had like tape insert holders in them. And my mum basically sold it all in the classifieds and said, with the money, you can get a Mega Drive. I was like, yes, it's going to happen. It's happening. And a relative intervened, meddling so and so, and put the seed in my mum's head that it should be an educational computer that also plays games. That this is what I should get. So it wasn't the Sega Mega Drive that was slid out from behind the sofa in the living room that day. It was an Atari STE, which a 1020 or 1040 STE, but it came with a big LP kind of cover style box, like a LP size, and you opened it up, and there was like discs all inside it. There was loads of games, and there was lots of Sega games. It was all arcade ports. It was like Afterburner, Space Harrier, Outrun was in there, and they weren't the best ports, but it was still Sega games. So I was pacified a little. Somehow managed to convince myself in later years that Zool was just as good as Sonic, which is clearly a lie. But yeah, so Sega's always been the company that I kind of gravitated towards in terms of gaming. That big blue logo just always meant something. I used to watch episodes of Games Master and Bad Influence, and I would just want to see Mega Drive games. That's all I wanted to see with Sega games. Even if the adverts came on British TV, like Johnny the Cybernetic Gamer, Cyber Razor Cut, all that stuff, I just wanted to have that trailer with all those Sega consoles in it, ninjas flying about and everything, but never quite happened. But that's where the seed kind of started in terms of kind of Sega gaming, and then whenever I got the Saturn, we'll get into that later on in terms of memories. But from then on, it's just been imported Dreamcast, went back after the imported Dreamcast and started importing Saturn stuff, and just kind of built it from there. And obviously I lost my collection in 2007 when I sold it all. So whenever I came and joined this wonderful community 5 years ago, I've managed to kind of pick up some things. And there's one particular thing, a prop. Well, it's a prop I've unplugged for the telly to show later on for a memory. But yeah, I've
Okay.
always gravitated towards Sega, but it was the kind of 8-bit computers, the 16-bit computers, and then the arcade and the Game Gear. Don't forget the Game Gear.
Yeah. Yeah,
where,
that's
where
important.
it all kind of started for me.
Yeah. And do you remember like the launch period of the Saturn? Were you hyped for it? Were you excited or not really?
No, well, my first time seeing the Saturn was on Bad Influence. You know, they had a Japanese console, they had a Japanese PlayStation at the same time as well. And Andy Crane very famously proclaimed that the Saturn would play its games from cartridge as well as discs, you know, which was quite amusing. He said it not once but twice. But at the time, I was still very kind of entrenched in the Amiga ecosystem. At the time, I went from an Atari ST to a Commodore Amiga, and a lot of school friends had that. And you know, X copy was your friend. A packet of blank discs and an X copy. Round your mates, copy some games, go down the road and play new stuff. Piracy, you know. But in terms of the Saturn itself, I was aware of Virtua Fighter because I played it in the arcades. My uncle used to take me to the arcade on weekends, and Virtua Fighter was there, and I played that. But yeah, the Saturn launch just was something. I think it passed by everybody because it was such a surprise. But yeah, seeing it on Bad Influence, kind of being aware of it being something that, you know, it's got Virtua Fighter on it, but I'm never going to own that. It just looked premium. You know, that
Yeah.
grey console with that glossy front, the blue buttons. It just looked like a premium bit of kit beyond anything that I'd ever owned to play games on. So it always seems like something, you know, that was really far away. They said it's coming out next year, but they never specified a date. Obviously, it was still meant to be September, and it was brought forward to July 8th, which again, that's a date that we'll go on to in due course with memories. But in terms of the launch itself, zero awareness of it at all. It wasn't until launch day itself, whenever I was finally made aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So, Dan, what about you? Big Sega fan in 94, 95?
Just a little bit. I
A
mean,
little bit?
just a little bit. So you always see those posts, don't you, on social media where someone says, well, what was your first game? What was your first game? I don't remember what my first game was. I've been obsessed with video games for as long as I can remember. But I remember the first game that absolutely blew me away, and that was Afterburner in the arcade. You know, I saw the great big, you know, rotating machine. I had like one go, it was like £1, and that was just like, it lasted like all of like 30 seconds and wanted more, and my parents were like, absolutely not. So all I wanted was something to play games on, which, because I'm of that age, similar vintage, it was an 8-bit micro. In my case, it was a Commodore 64, which I actually do have right behind me there. And one of my favorite games back then was Outrun. Now, obviously, the C64 port isn't great by, you know, normal standards, but it's good enough.
It's decent, yeah.
That changed from my brother. My brother wanted a computer, and he got a Master System 2, which for his birthday. And I remember he opened it up, had a game built in, which was Alex Kidd. And I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. But you know, I've got my Commodore 64 that still does a lot of stuff. And then like he had got a bunch of games. He got like Asterix, he got Mickey Mouse, and I was like, okay, this is looking really good now. Then he got Space Harrier. I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. And then my uncle, you know, these were kind of games that were quite old at the time. So I think they must have been kind of reasonable to pick up and kind of build a collection for him. Like, I remember Space Harrier still had the sticker on it, the price, which was $9.99. You know, which a bit of a steal at the time.
Oh, yeah.
But then my uncle came over, and he always kind of bought us the best presents. And he gave him two. I can't remember what the other one was, but the main one had a certain blue hedgehog on it. And after playing Sonic on the Master System, which remains one of my favorite games of all time, I was that was it. I was all in on Sega. Loved Sonic the Hedgehog, you know, and all the other games on there. I was just like, it wasn't my console, but I probably played it more than my brother. And of course, when Sonic 2 came out, I was like badgering my parents to get us one, and I said, okay, it'll be a three-way Christmas present between myself, my brother, and my sister, and we all shared the Mega Drive. But again, it was mostly something that I commandeered. It was in my room, and I was the oldest, so I had final say on it.
Imagine
So
if it were Zool.
I didn't
It
have
would have
Zool.
been much better, but it's okay. It's okay. It was a blue hedgehog.
I did want Zool. I did want Zool at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. I was obsessed with Sonic, so
James is like, no, why? Don't do that. No.
it makes me want Chopper Chops.
yeah. That's some great like product placement right there. Yeah.
Ahead of its time, mate. Ahead of
Oh
its
yeah.
time. You know what would game developers do for that sort of publicity these days? That sort of
exactly.
product placement. EA rubbing their hands, thinking, "Come on, we can get that sort of deal." But yeah, I was completely obsessed with Sonic and Sega, so had a bunch of games on the Mega Drive and the Master System. Carried on buying games for the Master System because obviously there was more Sonic games, Sonic 2, Sonic Chaos, but got loads more like Mega Drive and Master System games besides. And because those two consoles were obviously quite popular over here, with a bunch of our friends, we'd all swap games. You know, get like Heavyweight Champ, Alex Kidd and Shinobi World on the Master System through friends. The Streets of Rage games, we'd rent games. So I was obsessed. But the thing was, you know, it was one thing to convince my parents to get us a Mega Drive in 1992 as a three-way present between, you know, me, my brother, and my sister. There was no way in hell I was getting a Mega CD. As much as I'd kind of tested the waters. It's like this CD add-on, you know, it's £300, but it does these amazing things. Like, absolutely not. But you know, I wanted everything Sega. You know, and 1994, 1995, I was obsessed. And it was around that time I started a paper round and was saving my money for a 32X. But that was kind of where I was at the time that the Sega Saturn was rising to prominence.
And were you excited? Do you remember being excited about the Saturn at all, or?
So because that was the follow-up question, and this is the thing, and this is why I mentioned the Mega CD.
Yeah.
I saw the Sega Saturn, and I've been following. You know, I used to buy Sonic the Comic when it had kind of gaming news in there, and then I used to buy Mean Machine Sega. I used to buy Sega Power, and CMVG, and they'd show like Mean Machine Sega covered loads of Sega Saturn stuff, and they had like this mock-up of what it might look like. It looked really cool and futuristic. Obviously, it didn't look anything like that in the end, and I was just like, this thing looks amazing. But in there, they had box outs with Tom Kalinske saying, yeah, we could release a console today, but you know, we're not going to release one that's going to cost $400. If only you knew, mate. And me looking at the Mega CD, and I'm kind of like what James was saying just now, it looked like such a premium piece of kit. You know, it looked exotic, it looked futuristic. It was a sort of thing like, wow, this looks absolutely incredible. No way in hell am I ever going to be able to afford one. So it was one of these things where, and I didn't buy like Edge or those other kind of more mature gaming magazines. I think Maximum was another one that were covering the next gen stuff. So I was still very much in the Games Master, CMVG, as I say, Mean Machine Sega and the Sega Mags. Mega was another one. So it was just like, yeah, I've got the Mega Drive. I hear that the 32X is going to be pretty reasonably priced as an add-on, and I'll start saving for that. But yeah, the Saturn was just one of these things like, this is way out of my price range. So I'm just going to admire from afar and just because we'll get onto the launch in a minute, but it was just one of these things where I was just like, yeah, this is unobtainable, but I'm going to enjoy reading about it and seeing it if I ever see one in public.
Interesting. Yeah. I kind of like that you both had like the same idea of it, right? I think I felt the same, even though I never really ended up getting one back in the day. But I remember that, yeah, there was something like, I will never be able to get that. It does look premium and yeah, unobtainable in a way. So yeah. Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Rav, what about you? Were you a Sega fan? I don't think so.
Actually, that's a good segue because I'm gonna preface these with the assumption that one of the reasons why you invited me in is that I can bring some international flavor to the conversation, because technically there is nothing on the technical sense that I can add to the stuff that both Dan and James bring to the table. What I can bring to the table, though, is a first-hand s- story in which the Saturn was a mainstream success.
Yeah.
So yes, so there was a lot of Sega involved when I was really young. Although the first game I remember playing was actually on a ZX Spectrum that my cousin had in his basement. It was Super Monaco GP.
So okay, yeah,
So
on
back
brand.
back yeah, exactly. Back then, the fact that you pressed on the arrow keys and you would see like the driver turn the steering wheel, that was so mind blowing. Wow, good times.
Simpler
So that
times.
yeah, that eventually escalated to his Mega Drive. In the meantime, my parents actually got Timex Sinclair. It's Timex Sinclair 2068. It apparently, from what I've researched over the internet in the last few years, it was pretty big in Portugal, surprisingly, and that there were plenty of Portuguese devs doing stuff for it. And one of them was a cartridge specific to that Timex Sinclair that that allowed it to emulate the ZX Spectrum. So you inserted that cartridge into the Timex Sinclair, and then you connected the tape player to it, and it would be just like it. So as the ZX Spectrum. So
Okay.
that's my first experience. But then there was that jump to the Saturn. So I did not have a Mega Drive. The Saturn was the first one that I successfully convinced my parents to buy. Um, we're probably coming back later to these, but that was already a couple of years into the Saturn's lifetime in Europe. So I'm not gonna go into that now. Um,
So before maybe we can get into that right after you answer this.
okay,
Were you aware of the launch of the Saturn, and if so,
that's
were you hyped for it or not?
I honestly, I was 8 at that time, so I did not have that kind of perception
Hmm.
yet. So I was too young to feel that excitement. I think I
Okay.
was too young to feel that excitement. Oh, it's coming! It's awesome! At some point, it just arrived. I saw it on TV a few times. I saw it in a few stores around home,
Okay.
and it looked like the greatest thing ever, the coolest thing that's ever existed. I want one. It's brilliant, but that's it really. The As for hype, I think if you're looking for people who were hyped about its launch, you should have probably aimed for someone older than me.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I just wanted to like bring some context to the table so people listening to us or watching knew where we were coming from. So I'm just going to share briefly my recollection of that time because, as I said before, most of the memories here will be yours. I'm here to learn. But I do remember. So I had a Mega Drive, and that was my whole life in a way. Even though I could only play it like every other weekend at my dad's house, but I dreamt of playing games on the Mega Drive. I thought about like I remember drawing full maps of Sonic the Hedgehog zones in my free time and trying to remember every little detail because I wasn't playing the games during the week, but I was thinking about them and drawing them and stuff like that. I was a really, really big Sega fan. But then stuff in my family life and stuff happened. And so, even like financially, it wasn't really feasible to get a Saturn. Also, not feasible to get a Mega CD or a 32X, but let's not talk about that. But even in the Mega CD was really attractive to me as well. Like Dan mentioned. I remember like watching clips of Sonic CD on TV and stuff, and reading about that in magazines, and I was like, oh my god, I really need to play this. But that never happened, or at least back in the day. The Saturn was a little bit like that. I experienced the Saturn through like kiosks at shopping malls and stuff like that. Were very popular. Um, you would go to like a mall, shopping mall, and you have like a kiosk or two, and you could try Panzer Dragoon, perhaps, or maybe Baku Baku Animal. I do remember Baku Baku Animal. I do associate that game with like the launch period, like the first few maybe couple of years of the Saturn. I remember seeing it everywhere as well. Um, but I never got the console, so that's my recollection of it. I was hyped for it because it was a Sega system, so I hoped it would do well, it would be popular enough, and like I'm sure Rav will explain later, it was successful in Portugal, which is interesting, at least for a certain amount of time, and then things changed a little bit, but yeah. So those are my memories. So moving on swiftly to the next part, and Rav, I think you were trying to get into
Okay.
that a little bit. So when did you get your console? So it wasn't at launch, it was
Yeah.
later.
I mean, so yeah. Well, again, another preface. So the Saturn was the slippery slope that led to me having like 15 to 20 roles across both Portuguese and international, either general video game or Sega communities, and to build a career in the industry. So thank you, Saturn. Um, I did not get it at launch. Although, ironically, I think this is actually pretty common in Portugal because, weirdly enough, I feel that the Saturn only really got some traction by 97 ish, which is around the time I got it. I'm not exactly sure of the exact date, but I am fairly convinced it was 97, late 97. Um, at that time, I was still one of the first ones in my school to get one, but by the end of 98, uh, mm, I'd say two out of three boys had one. So my class had like 20 people, around 10 boys, and like 7 or 8 had a Saturn. So it was
Yeah.
a completely different reality to what people are used to seing on the internet,
Yeah.
especially in English
The
speaking
best reality.
internet. It is
I want to
absolutely.
go to your school. You had a good school.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's got this bit, but it's the thing is that it's also a bit backwards in the sense that it was a very small town and it was a primarily lower class town. So that also explains why the Saturn only started reaching people's homes by late 98.
But it's not like
um,
the country was not lower
yeah,
class as a
yeah. The
whole.
thing is, and
So
this that's true, but even
mhm,
so, there are major discrepancies, and this is
yeah,
one of the things that I
probably.
wanted to bring up today. That I never really mentioned it on the internet before, and this is a great place to debut it. But um, there is a major discrepancy in for people in the major cities, like especially Lisbon or around Lisbon, and people on the inside, because you are much more likely to see people who were hipsters, the hipsters that caught on to the PlayStation fad from the start instead of doing it in 99 like most Portuguese people, or the ones that had a Super Nintendo, which I had never seen one until like
Yeah.
2010, uh, instead of the Mega Drive. But if you went to the villages and towns, inlands, on the small ones amidst rural places and away from major towns, it was Sega Land. Sega was the mainstream thing for the people, not for the rich privileged people, but for the general people.
I
So,
think at some point Sega Land was everywhere. I think there we're always talking about like revisionism, and I think some few more privileged people had maybe Sega and Nintendo, or maybe just Nintendo for some reason. But I think most people. I remember I lived around like in the suburbs of Lisbon, and Sega was the thing. The Mega Drive was the console to have. The problem was not everyone was able to afford one, so that was a problem. That was an
yeah,
issue, right? But the ones who were able to afford more like a current gen console had a Mega Drive, and maybe a couple of other people had like a bootleg NES clone, like a Famiclone or something.
that's the one that most people had until the Saturn, at least
Okay.
in around my age.
I had a few friends with Mega Drives, so and then the Mega Drive 2 was big as well amongst my friends.
Yeah,
So, but I get what you're saying. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah, because you are much more likely to see people who had first-hand experiences with the Super Nintendo or the PlayStation early on instead of the Mega Drive and
maybe.
the Saturn in the capital, so to
Yeah,
say, or
probably.
like
Mhm.
higher class usually, because that
And I'm
just
and I'm
wasn't
also a
much
little
of
bit
an option
older
for
than
us.
you, so that's also a factor. Maybe.
Yeah, that's true. Although I am thinking about my cousin's generation, and that's
Hmm.
roughly the same age as you, I would say. I think
Hmm.
he's like 43 now.
I'm just 40, but okay.
Well, it's closer than I am.
And that's sadder, but okay.
Sorry.
That never mind. Move on,
I'm
please. Yeah.
45, man. Honestly, am I the oldest one here then?
Okay, so
I'm
so
hugging my Saturn pillow now.
uh,
He's a shotgun, eh?
I mean,
Anyway, I interrupted
I
you.
cannot laugh. I
So
cannot laugh
Rev.
because I'm gonna be there in just like a handful of years anyway. So yeah, I was so one thing that I don't think people realize is that, well, so Portugal's got around like 10 million people, which is pretty much the same as Greater London. And even so, there are lots of which, and this plays into the being a mainly a thing for mainly a thing for the small towns and villages. There are lots of communities still on Facebook debating retro games and the Saturn in Portuguese for Portugal, with hundreds of active users and thousands of people in. Well, if you think about London's population, those numbers are actually interesting. That is a relatively high percentage of people still actively talking about the Saturn. Um, it's an environment that I will admit I'm not personally comfortable with, because it's while it's Facebook, so I think you can guess why. And I don't think you will ever be if you're not Portuguese. I don't think you will ever be able to join them, because from what I see, they are not too receptive to outsiders.
Okay.
But unfortunately, this kind of experience that really shows how strong the Saturn and Sega were in the country, unfortunately, is not.
It's not being
Uh,
shared outside of the country because people don't really
exactly,
do that. Like
because
the
the
closed
yeah,
circle, closed group, right? Of
yeah,
people who, yeah.
because it's mostly people who either don't speak English or have no interest in talking to foreigners.
Okay.
um, whilst the ones that actually do that are the ones that tend to be they might not be, but they tend to be the ones that had the other kind of upbringing, the one in things other than Sega were valid options and possible options,
Hmm.
which wasn't the case for those of us. And all of these, just to say that, yeah, I wish people knew how huge this is. I'm trying to do my part, and I hope I could do better. Um, I got the Saturn roughly in mid to late '97, I believe. It was a unique Portuguese bundle. James, Dan, have you ever seen the Portuguese Sega Saturn bundle that came in with the Dragon Ball Z game?
No, I've not seen the bundle.
Nope.
I've seen the game. I've
Well, yeah,
I've not seen the kind of. So it was what it had an actual box bundle.
it was, yes, and I will try to look it up and I will send it to you. I've shared it on Twitter a few years ago when I was at Radio Sega, and even Till Lopsh liked it, and I think he even retweeted it because he probably remembers it from back in the day. Um,
I also
so
remember
yeah,
it, even though I never got one, but I remember that bundle as well.
so
I was trying to
this
find
is
a picture of it, but
a very unique work. Yeah. So I did get the console with that, and that was roughly around the time where the older games started to go down in price. Like if you remember KC, Saturn games and even Mega Drive games, when they came out, they were usually between 11,000 and 12,000 escudos, which would be like 55 to 60 euros pounds nowadays.
yeah, yeah,
So they started to go down to 7 grand escudos at some point, like 6,990.
yeah, like
So
35 euros. Although
yeah,
if you take inflation into account, it would be much
oh
much
yeah,
more expensive now. But yeah, at the time, like converting escudos into euros, it would be like 35
yeah. I mean,
euros then.
considering most people in Portugal were getting the equivalent to 300, 400 euros monthly.
Yeah,
That was a lot.
yeah, it was a lot. Was a lot. Yeah.
um, yeah, that's about it.
Okay.
So, oh, by the way, when I got it, I'm not sure if this helps situating it, but I got it with Sega Flash Volume 3. Not not sure if this helps
In terms
placing
of
it in
like
time.
the timeline, right?
Yeah, exactly. I
Okay.
see Dan's intrigued, is probably checking something.
I
I'm
was
checking
trying.
my demo discs.
I was also trying to find a picture of that bundle. I'll try to find it and show it
Uh, oh
later if I
yeah,
can.
I'll
Demo
do it.
three.
Yeah, I will look for it as well. I've probably got it here. So, what else? That
Yeah,
was the question, wasn't it?
yeah. And what games did you get with it? So Dragon Ball Z, obviously.
Yeah, and Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition. James is gonna hate it, but yeah, I mean, it means a lot to me because I had never played the original one in the arcade, and I had never
Mhm.
played it on the Saturn. So CC is the original Daytona to me. Okay, it means a lot to me. It's the one I grew up with. It's the one I got used to. So I eventually got attached to it. So it even felt weird at the start when I started playing the original Daytona USA game. But yeah, and after a while, the next ones I got, I think, were Virtual On and Sega Rally a few months later. And there's
Mhm.
actually an kind of interesting story about this. So I'll leave that for later, and
Okay.
I'll pass the baton for now.
Okay. Okay. So let's ask Dan the same question. So Dan, when did you get your Saturn? And
So
what games did you get with it? And like, tell us a little bit of your memories of getting the console.
yeah, so obviously when I was saving for the Photo X, as we know, that didn't quite work out. So
Why?
I think by the time I had
That's a
enough money,
bummer.
it had kind of crashed and burned. So I think the key thing for both of the Saturn and the Photo X was Virtua Fighter. So that was kind of the game to have for me. And of course, by the time I was saving for the Saturn, Virtua Fighter 2 had come out. Now, I actually got mine at late 1996. I had to use a combination of the money I'd saved and paper round money to buy it. £250 it had gone down to at that point, so it was kind of I'd saved up just enough. The price had come down just enough that it was actually a viable purchase for me. And the deals that were going around that time were pretty spectacular. So I got a deal in the electronic store called Comet. They always had like the Comet Index. They'd have it in the papers like what all the big deals were at the time, and there was a Sega Saturn, and I was like, yes. So went to Comet, went in there. Mum and dad, and I think my brother and sister were with me. I mean, they must have been with me, but yeah, they were with me, and mum and dad were there. And going there, I was like, one Sega Saturn, please, with my £250 cash. And the guy in comment is like, are you sure you want a Sega Saturn? Because most people get the Sony PlayStation. No, I'm sure I want to get a Sega Saturn, please. But don't you want to play Crash Bandicoot? No, I want to play Virtua Fighter and Nights into Dreams. And then my mum started going, well, are you sure you don't want a PlayStation? I'm like, no, I want a Sega Saturn. So got one that not quite, it isn't this one, but it looked like this. This is the Model 2.
So
Um,
wait, let me. You can do that again for
I can do that
people who
again.
are watching the video version. Okay, there we go.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
Not quite as chic as the original, but it's still a lovely, gorgeous looking console.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
yeah, brought it home, and the games I got with it were Sega Rally, Daytona USA, and Virtua Fighter 2. And now the funny thing is, when you bought a Sega Saturn in those first 18 to 24 months in the UK, I'm not sure about what it was like in the rest of Europe, it came with a SCART lead, like RGB SCART. And that kind of added to the fact that this was a premium console. You know, PlayStation had the crappy little boxed RF splitter that you plugged in, didn't have any onboard storage, didn't come with bundled with any games, looked like a cheap big plasticky thing. But anyway,
It was
it
the
came with
same in
this RGB.
Portugal with the
Yeah,
SCART cables, by the way.
yeah. So I pulled this SCART cable out, and upstairs in my bedroom, I've got this 14-inch. You know, you had to manually tuning everything. You know, it was all dials. So I'm like, where the hell is this going to go? This gigantic plug. I realised that we don't have that in my bedroom. We've got it in the. We rented a TV at the time because that was kind of a thing for a while.
Hmm.
So we rented a TV. It was like a 32-inch. I think it was a 32-inch Goodman's TV. So obviously it was 32-inch size screen, probably about double that going backwards. But you know, once you've you put on your explorer's hat and climbed around the back of the TV, you found the socket to put your SCART lead in. So it's got it all set up on the big telly in the front room. And I'm glad that that's what happened, because when I turned it on, it was like, oh my God, put Virtua Fighter 2 in. Obviously, Virtua Fighter 2, at the time, highest resolution visuals in any game, anywhere, arcade, PC. You know, it was higher resolution than the arcade even. And that blaring out of this TV, you know, it was a bit like that Simpsons episode with Frill House, wasn't it? It's like, it's amazing, and I've only entered my name. It was kind of like that, and there's still, you know, that memory sits with me, because that is the most blown away I've been by any console, like ever. Because the leap from, you know, probably a week before, I was still playing games like Comic Zone and the Mega Drive port of Theme Park and games like that, Micro Machines too, probably. So going from that to Virtua Fighter 2 and Sega Rally and Daytona USA, and even though, you know, Daytona USA had its critics, obviously hugely letterbox display, runs the power conversion's atrocious, so it's like it runs 20 frames per second if you're playing it at NTSC speed. It's like 17 or something like that if you're playing the PAL version. But I didn't care, because to me, seeing 40 polygonal cars on the track zipping around at that speed, you know, to me, it still kind of was the arcade, and it was amazing fun. Sega Rally, it took a while for me to grow into that. I'd played it on a demo pod beforehand, and I loved the way it looks, but couldn't get on with how it played. But then when the handling clicked, you know, that just became an obsession for me. So eventually, I had to go out and spend £14.99 on an RF lead because I couldn't commandeer the living room forever. No one was having that. As much as I got away with kind of stealing the Mega Drive and Master System off my siblings, I couldn't get away with stealing the telly off my parents. So
Yeah.
eventually it got put upstairs, and and that was pretty much that. My
Mhm.
friends were over when I was playing it on their living room telly, and they were blown away, and they was like, "This is amazing." They still brought PlayStations, so the bastards, but did my best to try and sell it at the time.
Excellent. Yeah. I can imagine you probably had like a very much smaller TV in your bedroom, right? Like a
Yeah, it was.
little box, right? And so seeing it in all its glory, the game in all its glory in the 32-inch one was probably mind blowing. I can relate. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, the one I had in my bedroom, my sister actually still has it because there's a lot of nostalgia for it. It's something from like the 70s or something. It's like a little 14-inch. And as I say, every channel had a dial. You couldn't like use a remote control.
Yep.
They all had little dialing wheels on them to
Yep.
try and tune every single individual channel in. Only had 8 channels. Yep.
Yep.
James is doing the little tuning
Yeah, that's
motion.
true. Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, once I had to take it upstairs to play in my own bedroom, some of the luster of that RGB signal had been kind of
Mhm.
lost a little bit. But still playing these games in
On
3D,
on
I
the other
just find
hand, you could play it more often, probably. So right,
more often or all the time.
all the time.
Yeah, it was. I was
Yeah.
obsessed with it.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it was like my favorite thing ever in the world. Still is,
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, James, what about you? So you have a different story for us, I believe.
Yeah,
Everyone has a different story, but yours is different in
yeah,
some
so
ways.
so I got the Sega Saturn twice, and the reason why is because to kind of set the scene, my uncle was a massive like techie, right? Like in the 90s, the guy just bought everything. I'm talking laser disc, mini disc, imported DVD when it came out like a year and a half before it. He had to have the latest stuff. And I went up obviously one day, which turned out to be the launch weekend of July 8th. I used to visit his house at weekends all the time just to kind of go up and see what new stuff he had, because he literally just had something new every week. And he stopped me at the entrance to, he had a room that was specifically for like home cinema and game stuff. And he stops me at the door, and he's kind of smirking, and he's got something behind his back. And all I hear coming from behind this door is what we now know to be the diddle 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 ding ding, the Sega AM2 that comes up on the white screen. And he's pressing the buttons behind his back, and I hear this kind of crescendo of the start button, the diddling, diddling. We're in no, and he just picks Akira because it's the first character. And behind the door, all I hear is "Fight one, ready, go!" And I'm like, "Holy shit!" He's got Virtua Fighter in there, the game that he takes me to the arcade to play every weekend. So, in my mind, before he opens the door, I'm thinking, has he actually got a cabinet in this place? Because like, he's that crazy, he would have done it. But it wasn't. It was the Sega Saturn hooked up to a 55-inch rear projection TV and a 5.1 surround sound, and the Saturn is this exact one. That is
So
the
let's
Saturn
show it.
from
Yeah.
that day. And there's a story behind that as well, how I was reunited with that, but that is the Saturn from that very day. So that's a VEO PAL
Mhm.
Mark 1. And, he hands me the controller, and I'm just looking at it, and I'm like, I'm just standing in complete awe. Like, I can't believe Virtua Fighter is running in front of me. Excuse me. And well, the Saturn port of Virtua Fighter over the years has been kind of much maligned in terms of, oh, the polygons glitch, and Virtua Fighter Remix was an apology for how bad the port was, and because Sega were so stung by criticism. That's bullshit. It was a test for Virtua Fighter 2 and texture map polygons, but don't let anybody tell you otherwise. But yeah, so seeing Virtua Fighter in the home was just crazy, and as I say, I was reunited with that machine. In 2020 during lockdown, he found it in the loft. It was kind of covered in a white spray. Kind of, he loved to do like kind of paint and spray painting kind of projects up in his loft, and it was covered in. I can send the pictures on to you. It was covered in a kind of white undercoat. I had to really scrub at it to get it clean, to get it back to that condition. So it's got a Fenrir ODE in it now as well. So it's the disk drive was taken out. I had no desire to pay collector's prices to buy back the games that I once had. So Dan got the CD drive from it. And the thing is, my uncle worked away like all week, Monday to Friday. He worked away. He was only home at weekends. So the only person who played that was me. He literally bought it for me to play at his house when I visited. But then I would get my own, as much as playing it once a week wasn't enough. I needed my own. I had to have it. Like to do the Gollum, we want it, yes, we do, master, we need it. It's like we need the precious. So Christmas '96, very similar to Dan's story. $249.99. My bundle came from Dixon's. I think it was all Dixon's, Curry's, and Comet were all very much of a muchness in terms of electronic stores. And fortunately, it was still the Mark I that I managed to get, and it was a 5-game bundle. It was Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally, Thunderhawk 2 Firestorm, Loaded, and Euro 96, the official game. Now, I love that game, man. I played that for so long. Got Barry Davies on commentary with the most awful but brilliant commentary of a football game. It's Ali McGeist. It's like just
I have stuff to say about that game as well.
But the funny thing is, like, I remember watching that tournament on TV, and there was like foam fingers in the crowd at Wembley, and they had like the Euro 96 logo on one side and Sega Saturn on the other. Like, who at Sega decided what we're going to spend money on for marketing? There's a football tournament on. Let's print some foam fingers. Bizarre, but
maybe the same person who decided to sponsor like 4 football teams across Europe. I don't know.
Yeah, well, who knows?
And spend a lot of money.
I don't think Giles Thomas was there yet, but it sounds like the kind of thing he would do. But the thing that obviously you got, at the kind of the launch period was the bootleg sampler demo disc. That was that was my first exposure to Sega Rally, and you got to play the forest track on a 1-on-1, just a practice lap on forest, or 2 laps it was, and whenever I got the retail version later on, got that later on, and the first thing I noticed is that the Celica model in that was different to the Celica model in this. And for years there was this kind of story that the Sega changed the car model because the Saturn couldn't handle the polygons used to draw the larger arcade style Celica. And it wasn't until obviously Pandemonium did his brilliant 4.5-hour documentary on Sega Rally that it was purely just that Sega wanted to have a model of Celica that was closer to the one that was used at that time. So, I've got the build that demo came from on my Fenrir. You can get it off Hidden Palace. It's like the late October build, 75%. Doesn't have the attract mode, doesn't have the replays whenever you finish the race, but it's got the arcade style Celica in there. And for so long, whenever I was playing on that, I would default to that because I wanted that goddamn car. I needed it to look like the arcade. My OCD for Sega Rally kicked in, but after Nick's documentary, I sort of found myself at peace. I can now play the retail version because there's a reason behind it. So, but no, I say got to experience getting one not once but twice. But the fact that I've been reunited with that machine, as much as the Saturn that I got for day-to-day use in my own house is long gone, that machine there with that memory attached to it, walking in and seeing it running Virtua Fighter, there's a hell of a lot of emotional attachment to that exact Sega Saturn console. Like, it would pain me for anything to ever happen to it, for it to break, go missing, get sold. You're going nowhere, my lovely. Just you sit there. I'm going to play you when this is done.
I suddenly feel dirty. Okay. This is a mature podcast. Yeah, but that's amazing. That's awesome. So obviously, when we do these kinds of episodes, we don't want to. I don't want to go too deep into like the history of things and technical side of things because I think other people do it better. I said this during the Dreamcast episode. So like people like you guys, the Sega guys, and other people in the community do like much more in-depth videos of that kind of stuff. And so I would urge people to watch the Sega guys channel and others to get into that sort of thing. I'm more I'd like to go more in depth into like our memories and the feelings that these systems bring up in us because it's like it's not about the horsepower, that's not about the like the polygons that one console can render or not. It's about what made you feel joy back in the day and what still makes you feel joy, right? And that's why we play video games, to escape, to feel good, to have fun. And that's what I wanted to focus more on. You, all of you, obviously feel strongly about this system today still, right? So it's not like a thing of the past that you really enjoyed and you like to reminisce about. It's something that you still think is important. So, well, and let's this time change things around and start with you, Dan. What does the Saturn mean to you? What did it what did it mean back in the day, and is it still the same as what it means now? Has it changed? What impact did it have on your life? These are like very deep emotional questions and philosophical questions even. But yeah.
So the Sega Saturn has always been this kind of exotic console to me. Even when I got one, I was constantly amazed by what it was doing, and that's still the case today. I've literally just looked on my phone. I was like, I had to see this Dragon Ball case, right? I've never seen it before. This Dragon
Did
Ball
you find
bundle.
it?
Oh my god, it is! Oh, now I want one. Now I want one. You know, I'm a massive Dragon Ball fan, and I know the game's kind of. But looking at that, I'm like, oh my god, that's amazing! That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's like Sega and Dragon Ball, perfect. And the thing is, the console still elicits those sort of emotions from me. And the Sega Saturn was, when I bought it, when I first saw it, it was kind of this out of reach, exotic thing. It's unobtainium. It's this beautiful thing. You could never afford it. And then when I finally brought it home, I was just like, oh my god, this is amazing. And I'd get like I had the free games that came with it, and then I'd play Sega Flash Volume One that came with my Saturn, and I'd play Panzer Dragoon. Panzer Dragoon's Vi was the demo on there, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" And it was just like I would always be continually blown away by what I was playing on there. Um, and that's the thing is, the console still astounds me today. You know, back then I'd get astounded by playing. The first game that I bought after I bought my console was Nights into Dreams, and that was a game. That was kind of a voyage of discovery. That was something that was it's still very much the soul of the Sega Saturn. It's quirky, it's unique. People didn't quite. That's the Sega Flash video right there. Nights is quirky, it's unique. There's people that just don't quite understand it, but it's one of these things that when you give it time and let yourself kind of understand it and grow into it, then it gives you an experience quite unlike any other. And that's the Sega Saturn to a degree. And I couldn't really understand why others were picking other consoles, and why the guy in Comet was saying, "Oh, you should be picking up a PlayStation," because to me, I was playing the best console. The
Yeah.
games that I was playing, I was never at any point thinking I think that I could be playing something different, or I could be playing something better. I was playing the
Hmm.
best. I was playing Virtua Fighter 2 and then looking at Tekken 2 on the PlayStation and thinking, is this it? You're kind of flat, static backgrounds, you're blocky, slow characters. Sure, they got a little bit of sparkle when they hit each other, but why is everyone saying this is better than what I'm playing? Because I look at Ridge Racer, or, this, I compare that to Sega Rally, and even when Gran Turismo came out, I was like, well, it's kind of impressive, but it's a bit dull, isn't it? you know.
Hmm.
So there's still kind of that passion and excitement that I still get from the Sega Saturn. And even today, you get, someone will do a translation. I know there was controversy around it, but you look at something like Princess Crown and the kind of excitement that sparked in a lot of in the community,
Hmm.
and there was obviously um, a little bit of drama around it, and it wasn't quite as rosy in the end. But I think that when you look at the game itself and the excitement that people had around it, there was that love and that passion around the Saturn. And that's kind of where I am with the Sega Saturn. That's kind of the impact I had on me. To me, the Sega Saturn is the most Sega console. Is Sega at their kind of pinnacle. I think you look at the Mega Drive and the Master System, and you don't quite have the arcade synergy. The Master System, it's got some ports. You'll get decent ports like Space Harrier, and you'll get something like Enduro Racer that's completely different, or Line of Fire, completely different to the arcade. Similar, the Mega Drive, it started off with arcade ports, and they kind of petered out, and then it became kind of the Sonic console. And there's, the Mega Drive is amazing, but you look at Sega's first party output. For a lot of that, they started off quite strong, and then they kind of moved into kind of other realms. And obviously, they were trying to support the Master System, Mega Drive, Game Gear, 32X, and Mega CD towards the end of it. But then when they closed all that down and focused solely on the Saturn, you kind of got all the best of Sega up until the Dreamcast came out. And that was kind of Sega when they were at their most daring. You look at something like Panzer Dragoon, them just going, right, we need new ideas for a game. Everyone just throw your ideas in. And Yukio Futsusugi is like, how about a game where you fly around a post-apocalyptic world on a dragon? Great idea, sir. Here's a team of 15 people. Go and make it. That's insane, right? And it's like Dragon Force. That game. It was just like that offshoot of Wolf Team. They were developing. I can't remember what they were called now. Something Force. They were developing it. They got shut down because their lead producer just kind of disappeared off the face of the earth, and Sega
Shining
just
Force.
swooped in. So the team behind, I
No, the
think it was
team,
Z
the J
Force.
Force, I think. J Force.
J-Force, that's it. J-Force. I
Yeah.
made the video about it a few weeks ago, and I've already forgotten about it. They were an offshoot of Wolf Team, and then they kind of got shut down, and Sega just swooped in, sent a bunch of their kind of crap programmers like, yeah, let's make this a thing. This sounds like a great idea. They were just doing stuff that was at the frontier of gaming, really. And the thing that frustrates the most about the Sega Saturn for me is that so many people copied what Sega did, and Sega don't get the credit for it. Virtua Fighter doesn't get anywhere near the recognition that it deserves. Obviously it's an arcade game, but it came to the Sega Saturn first, sold 1-to-1 with the Sega Saturn in Japan. Virtua Fighter 2 is the biggest selling game on the Sega Saturn worldwide, and that every fighting game wanted to be Sega Saturn. Even Tekken 3 was designed to compete with Virtua Fighter, even though by that point there hadn't been a new Virtua Fighter on Saturn for 3 years. Virtua Cop, that inspired GoldenEye, Time Crisis. Panzer Dragoon, I think, is the grandfather of all your cinematic action games that you get today. What game before Panzer Dragoon really pushed the envelope in terms of cinematic storytelling with
Yeah.
fully voice acted cutscenes, in-game cinematics in between levels, and people say that the gameplay is simple. I mean, look, let's be real. The gameplay in The Last of Us is simple. The gameplay in God of War is simple. The gameplay in Hellblade 2 is simple. It's pretty much the same thing. And Panzer Dragoon was the grandfather of that. It wouldn't surprise me if Sony looked at that back in the day and was like, yeah, that's the sort of thing we need to basically make all our future games around. So it's a shame that it doesn't get the recognition it deserves. But yeah, that is the Sega Saturn to me. It's exciting. It's
Hmm.
exotic. It's in the DNA of gaming from my perspective, and it very much embodies everything that I want from a video games console.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's why it remains my favorite console of all time.
Okay, well said. Well said. I
Casey,
yeah. Sorry. Let me just say this before I forget, because I'm old. I'm older than you, son. Uh, I just want to say I do think that the Saturn gets some recognition, but not just. So this is a panel of old people, old men from the West, right? A couple of Portuguese people, a couple of Brits, and obviously in the West there's been a lot of revisionism in terms of like the history of video games and stuff. But I do think that if we go to Japan, obviously in Japan the Saturn was much more successful, and the impact it made in like the video game developers of today is much more acknowledged than it is in the West. So just like as a parenthesis here, while I do, I think we should really turn to that part of the world to see the impact that the Saturn had in like the history of video games and in modern video game development as well, because it's more than I wouldn't say it's overstated. It should be stated more often, but it they acknowledge that they were heavily influenced by games they played on the Saturn or things they saw being made for the Saturn or being done on the system. So, and that says a lot, right? It's just that some people choose not to to acknowledge that and to consider that for those developers, which are a big part of what we play today, the Saturn was important. Rent over.
Yeah, yeah. We just don't get that in the West. I mean, you look at the kind of stuff that's been coming out of Beep in the recent weeks. You know, they've been doing kind of the celebration stuff, and they put out something that said the Sega Saturn was a wild success and sold like hotcakes. You know, that's not something that you hear over here, and you don't hear any of that really in the Western media, which is a shame. You know, there should be a more global view on what is the legacy of the Sega Saturn. And I still don't think we get that. And Sega themselves is just as guilty as anyone of, not honoring
Yeah.
the
Yeah, for
legacy
sure.
of their own system.
For sure. For sure.
And that's why it comes down to us to shout from the rooftops for kind of the Western civilization to say how great this console
We
was.
need to be the Segata-san heroes of 2024. Yeah.
Yeah.
this all reminds me, and this is not even what I was gonna say a few minutes ago. So now I've got three things to say.
Oh my God.
So this reminds me and I've already told you this, KC, but I don't think Dan and James know, and probably the listeners won't be aware. But I am 100% sure that by 99-ish, 2000, 2001, around that, there was someone on Portuguese TV saying, like, it was one of those teen shows, o Curto Circuito. Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was
Mhm.
like a techie
Like
show and cool
short
show for,
circuit.
yeah, it was like the cool
It
show
was like,
for teens, so to say.
yeah, for
Which, well, I was a
young
teen,
people,
so,
for the youths.
and I was a teen, so I enjoyed it. And I am yet to find out who this is. There was some guy telling people something akin to, still talking about the Sega of Portugal, which in truth was Ecofilm's story. And he, at some point, he said, Portugal is where the Sega Saturn was the most successful, except for Japan. And I did not really understand just how true that was back then, because I mean, I still wasn't at a level where I could communicate with people across the world in English, and that probably did not even have cable back then. It was probably still the 65k 56k modem. So I found it interesting, but I was never able to forget it, because the more I've been in this world and on the internet, the more I realize how true that is.
Yeah.
Because at the time I was like, seriously?
Yeah.
So
For such a
I
small
mean,
country, right? Doesn't make sense.
yeah, because it never even crossed my mind that the Saturn wasn't a huge success everywhere else, because
Hmm.
why would it be a huge success in Portugal if it wasn't? And then I started talking with Americans, and it's almost as if it barely existed. So that's when it started to set in. Well, maybe the world's got a different story to what we have in this little corner of the world. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean, we had I
bottom
feel
line
like
is, go on, go on.
we end up talking about Cybermaster every time you're on the show, Rav. But we
Yes.
had a show called Cybermaster here that
Oh,
ran,
I was going to talk about
and
it.
I just checked. It ran from December 95 to April 97, and it was focused around, there was a story, but there was focused around Sega games and mostly Saturn games.
Oh, it was
It was,
produced
I think,
by Echo Films. It was
yeah,
directly produced by Sega of Portugal. So all
exactly.
of it was on the Mega Drive or
So
on the Saturn.
where else in the world would you get like something like that? That was,
And that's,
and that explains part of the success of the Saturn as
yeah.
well.
And I was going to talk about it when you asked me how I started to love the Saturn. And now let's segue into that, shall we?
Yeah, we shall.
Because it was on TV on Saturday morning on, so it is the Portuguese equivalent of BBC, by the way, guys. BBC One. It was the main public channel in Portugal that everyone had access to. The first channel ever there was. Blah blah blah. It was every Saturday at like 10, 11 a.m. Showing those Saturn and Mega Drive competitions and news and updates and everything to the entire country. From, as KC said, from 95-ish to 97-ish. And people my age fell in love with it, mostly because it was the coolest thing ever. And that really helped.
I mean, look at it. How could you not fall in love with this?
The thing is, this was actually way ahead of its time, because all of
Yeah, for sure.
this steampunk theme, it started getting popular after this.
James and Dan are like, where are the video games here? Like, I just get.
And the thing
There
is
was
that
a
I
story
it's like
around
a
this. Yeah.
yeah, I believe that,
what
yeah,
is
there
that?
was a story.
Why is there a bondage version of Kano just came on my screen?
Technically, this
Hold
is some
on,
kind of future,
no,
and
Yeah,
those
like
guys
a
have
look,
to play
guys,
consoles for their
a
lives.
dystopian
no.
future, like a
Yeah.
post-apocalyptic. They all live underground, and they're
Oh,
like,
favorite game, World Light Soccer '97.
there you
Perfect.
go,
Oh,
there
good
you
choice.
go.
So thing is, what was I gonna say?
Okay,
Oh,
so
right. I believe.
yeah.
That boy looks terrified. By the way, do you see the hand in the shoe?
Th- they're supposed to, because they're fighting the Cybermaster.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
All right.
So I believe that everyone around the world should be able to see this on RTP's archive website.
Yeah,
Oh, I mean, it's going to be in Portuguese, but you can still look at the games, I guess.
yeah.
That's so beautiful. Oh, one bit of trivia about Sega Rally. They actually had Sega Rally on it before it launched in Europe, before it launched in the PAL regions. And the
Oh,
way you can tell it, if you go to the first Cybermaster episodes where they played Sega Rally, if you look at the speedometer, it's in miles per hour. So it's
okay.
the American version. And then eventually it changed to kilometers per hour, as you see there, when it
Mhm.
launched in Europe in the PAL regions. That's
Okay.
when they started using it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm distracting you. I apologize.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, it's just that the listeners are not gonna
Yeah,
know what we're talking
go
about.
watch the video version of this if you want to like enjoy like the amazing quality of a 90s Portuguese TV show based
Yeah,
around Sega Saturn games.
and you should probably share the RTP archives link
I'll do that in the show
Um,
notes. Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So yes, so this is essentially what made me fall in love with Sega, because I was like 8 to 10 when this aired, and this was brilliant. I just wanted to be the one playing it and competing against others.
Yeah.
We
Even
only we'd golden joysticks on Channel 4 with Dominic Diamond and Games Master. You had Bondage Kano and Scary Woman in a Red Dress. Like, was
And it's like I didn't remember this. I don't think was like one of those like locked away memories in my brain. They all had to pick like war names or something, or like
yeah,
some sort of right. So there's a Dragoon,
yeah,
and then there's Diablo, and, and they're playing against each other. They have their like nicknames. On screen, Shark.
Shark.
There you go, Shark.
Yeah, and
Wow, it's
you
terrifying.
know, Casey, sorry to interrupt you, but another tidbit I realized when I watched all of them, like from the beginning to the end, within like a couple of weeks. One thing I noticed is that you can actually realize and you can actually see how Portuguese culture started to get international and to absorb American and the British stuff. Because at the start, nearly all of them had Portuguese war names, and then it
Oh,
slowly
okay.
morphed into English names like Shark.
Shark
So
and Dragoon.
it felt like it was a couple of years in which Portugal opened itself to the world in a way,
Okay.
and started receiving influences from the US and stuff.
Mm.
Anyways, this is a bit of a sidestep here on the topic, so let's go back to the Saturn, shall we? Um, I forgot one of the other two things that I wanted to say. One
I'm
of
sorry.
them. Hopefully, it's gonna come back. But so when Dan was hyping up the Virtua Fighter 2, and that it was the cream of the crop and what everyone else wanted to be, every other fighting game wanted to be. I will say this, and this is the hill I will die on. I am strongly confident that had Virtua Fighter been on the PlayStation and Tekken on the Saturn, Virtua Fighter would be the 3D fighting game genre's flag bearer to this day instead of Tekken. Because it
No
is
doubt.
not that Tekken is better than Virtua Fighter, it is that it was on a much more successful platform and showed itself to many more people.
You only have to
100%.
look at Virtua Fighter 4, and the minute the Virtua Fighter finally came to a Sony console with the PlayStation 2, look at the review scores for Tekken 4 and 5 and Virtua Fighter 4. What game is
Yep.
constantly touted as the best 3D fighter on the PlayStation?
Virtua
It's
Fighter
on.
4 massively outsold Tekken 4 in Japan.
Yeah.
There you go.
Not in the
There
West,
you
though.
Yeah.
The thing is, well,
Okay.
the PlayStation magazines of the era in the UK were always talking about Virtua Fighter killers, and then the minute VF4 came to a Sony console, all of a sudden it became a good game, a good series. You know, it's like, oh, because we've got access to it now, all of a sudden it's acceptable to like it. Now, please go away, man. Just like it's true. If those games had been reversed, different fortunes. But yeah,
Yeah.
don't go too many tangents. What was it? What was the question again?
Yeah. So your question, James. It's your turn. What does the Saturn mean to you? And then we'll go
Oh,
back to
that's
Rav,
right.
and he'll answer this question.
Yeah, what did it mean back in the day, and what does it mean now?
Yeah. Is it
Um,
any different or still the same?
a bit of the same, but more expanded. Back in the day, the Saturn meant two things to me primarily. It was the arcade in the home, and it was the crux of a great friendship. So, obviously going to the arcade at weekends and seeing all these Sega games, and then realizing that the Saturn was getting versions of them. So like Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally, Virtua Cop 2, Sega Touring Car, House of the Dead, as much, Manx TT, as much as you can find flaws in those ports, you were still able to play versions of these behemoth arcade games in your home. And that became like a kind of a weekly occurrence. You would look around the arcade at the new games coming in, and you would sort of think to yourself, well, that might be coming to the Saturn. That one might come to Saturn. And then you start to see things like Athlete Kings and or Decathlete as it's called in Japan, Winter Heat, the STV games, Die Hard Arcade, and those come to the Saturn completely perfect. Obviously, Saturn running on the those games running on the STV board, which is based on Saturn's architecture. But at the crux of it all was a friendship with my best friend Sam at the time, and him and I used to take walks to a local indie import store called CA Games, and the CA stood for Charlie Ambrose, who was the owner of that store. And where we stayed, we used to stay in a wee place called Scotstoun, and it was about a 45-minute walk to Byers Road, which is where Charlie was based. And we would just walk and talk about the articles in Sega Saturn magazines, the games that we'd swapped and we'd played each other's games, having a laugh at that Sega Rally game where I just beat him at the last corner, and the game of Worldwide Soccer 97 where it was a great 6-5 game, and just talking away about just anything to do with just playing Sega Saturn. And obviously, Sam got his a year after me, so he used to come up to my uncle's with me, and he'd get to experience it. He first got to experience Sega Saturn up there on that very console as well. And he still got all his collection. He showed me photographs of it on WhatsApp, and I've like, please mate, don't ever sell any of that, because in a way, those memories are his, but a lot of those games that he's got there, I was with him when he bought them. So there's a kind of shared connection to those games. And, when he was showing me some of the things, he opened up his copy of Panzer Dragoon. Oh my God. And he showed me the inside of the case. He lifted up the disc, so the side with the manual on it, and the gold sticker for Game Zone and Partick. Like they used to open up their games, right? They would take the manual and the disc out, put it in like a shelf behind the counter. You would then walk up, and the box that you took off the shelf was the box you took home. They would then go to the shelf, take out the disc and the manual.
That's a memory. Yeah, that's a memory for myself, for me as well. Yeah. Like you had like the empty box, that one, and then they took the disc with the cartridge and they put it in the box, and you took that home. Yeah,
and that ties into the memory I mentioned a while ago.
Yeah.
But there was always a little gold sticker that they put inside every case of every game, and it was Game Zone, Partick, their telephone number, and their address. And I don't know why they put it on. It was just a little gold sticker. And he sent me a picture, and it was that gold sticker, and I got this insane nostalgic wave of like what felt like pins and needles through my head. It was oh my God, man, I can't believe you still got that. So the Sega Saturn is very deeply tied into that. As much as Sega Rally is my favourite game of all time. I consider myself to be pretty damn good at it, but it's a game that I can go back to time and time again. I never get fed up of it at all. But that system and those times with Sam were just they're intertwined. I can't think of that console without thinking of him in those times, and that kind of takes me on to what it means today, because he laughs at that I'm doing this whole Sega content creation thing. He says if you could go back and tell the 15-year-old you that in your mid-40s you'd be doing a Sega channel, still talking about Sega Saturn, you would probably laugh. But what I love about the Saturn today is that we have got an absolutely amazing community, whether it's the homebrew guys, the indie guys, our colleagues at Sega Saturn Shiro, Sega Lord X, the guys doing the crazy stuff behind the scenes with mods. We've got ODE options. The console that was a failure is the most supported in terms of options for modification. You've got Fenrir, you've got mods, you've got Saru, you've got Satiator, you've got all these options for every budget. Getting into Sega Saturn now has never been easier, and it's amazing to see so many people embracing the console now. That maybe didn't give it a chance back in the day, or maybe put off by friends who all had PlayStations and they kind of overlooked it, and they play games like Jason Madison, good friend of ours, and he was a PlayStation guy, and he got a Saturn kind of influenced by us, and he picked up a Saturn and he got a Fenrir in it, and he was playing games, and he messaged me on WhatsApp and he says, I can't believe I looked this console over. Like, this is an Aladdin's cave of absolutely incredible gaming experiences, and that to see all these people now who have got no experience of it come at it with a fresh set of eyes and still pick up little hints. You see little hints of people still getting the same emotions and feelings that we did back then. And that's testament to the machine. That's what the machine transmits. Like, today we have this whole thing about, every bit of new content around Sega Saturn has to be prefixed with, it was a commercial failure. And as I said in the video I did, and Dan's the same, like, the time we don't need to prefix content in 2024 with the commercial failure of the console. What matters is what it's doing now. It's resurgent. It's got an amazing community. Games, mods, homebrew, content. You can learn so much. There's just a plethora of great Sega Saturn content out there in this community. So it's amazing to see that something that I loved when I was a teenager is still something that means so much. Like, my wife jokes it's a midlife crisis. It's like, well, it's the longest midlife crisis ever, because I started doing this when I was 40 and I'm 45 now. So it's been going for a long time, but it's like, it's just a machine that means so much. It meant a lot back then as a games console, and something that kind of a friendship was built on. But today, to be within the community, to be on a channel that we've grew to a point where people respect and listen to what we've got to say, and I feel that that's the kind of mantra that we live by at the Sega Guys. We want, not just, we do it for all of Sega, but Saturn's our favourite, and we just want to kind of educate and inform and just try and inject that little bit of passion. See how much we love this system can come through the microphone to just a couple of people and make them try Sega Saturn. That's amazing. That means a lot. And before, just to finish this point off, that machine, but smash my microphone. That machine is the crux of Dan and I's relationship. Like, Sega Saturn is the common ground we've both got in terms of favourite console. We both love Sega. We both have very similar experiences growing up with them. But Saturn's that kind of one, joining kind of factor. It's what kind of unites the two of us to kind of drive on and make this the Sega Guys what it is. So it's just an amazing machine. Like, I wouldn't be sitting here without it. It's as simple as that.
Well said. Like I said before, modern day Segata Senshiros. Okay, Rav, what about you? So you touched on this a bit, but
Yeah.
what did it mean back then, and what does it mean today?
Yeah, I'm pretty much just gonna expand on things that I've already touched on. So back then it was the coolest thing ever. It was on Cybermaster. It was on TV a lot. It was on every single store and every single retail, those major retail stores,
Like
what we
department
call.
stores and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was everywhere. And that's what it meant at the time. So and it also meant plenty of hours, because I was only really allowed to play games on Wednesdays and on the weekends, and even so I would just go for it every time I could. Now, in hindsight, it's actually a good thing that my parents did not let me overdo it. It wasn't all that pleasant back then, because I really wanted to play more, but anyways. And through the time, I never really stopped loving those, and I still got those memories attached, that are some of the biggest highlights, I'd say, in my life and growing up. So, for example, a while ago I considered grabbing screenshots from games and other similar things that mean a lot to me and meant a lot to me growing up, and that were impactful in my life, and putting them on either coasters or mouse pads. And at roughly either 7 out of 10, actually 7 or 8 out of 10 of the items I had on my chart list were Saturn. I only really had one made. Here it is. So
Oh,
this
there
is a
you
mouse.
go. Oh, wait. We that deserves like a.
This is a
There you
mouse
go.
pad.
Okay.
But there would be plenty more had I had the money for it. Uh, and as I mentioned a while ago, that's where my love for gaming started. That's what led me to pretty much have the life I've had, the professional career I've got, and all the experiences I've had across gaming communities, the streaming or on Radio Sega live shows, and I also wrote for a few sites. I don't really do it anymore, and I also hosted tournaments, video game tournaments, and I was a mod on some large communities, and so on and so on. And all of these only really came to fruition because of the Saturn. The Saturn kickstarted all of this, and all of its.
and Dragon Ball Z as well.
Oh yeah. Uh, Spoiler alert! I'm gonna talk more about this game later on.
Okay. Okay. Good. So let's move on. Let's move on. It's amazing to have such passionate people here on the show. I have to say, thank you again, guys. I'm going to say this again, but thank you for coming, for joining me. I'm enjoying this very much. I wanted to mention, so something James already mentioned this, and maybe we can briefly touch upon this as well. How is the Saturn relevant today? Because I feel like it's not just like old guys reminiscing on their memories and playing the games they love, and retro gaming is a thing, of course, and let's play these old games that we played back in the day. It's not just that there's a whole community around the console, of course. And the thing about communities is that everyone's got their like specific interests. They they use their talents, their skills, their passions to create something different. And how do you feel like the Saturn is relevant in 2024 slash 2025, going into 2025, in terms of what people are doing with this system, this 30-year-old system now? Um, James, maybe you want to start us off. You already mentioned some of the things like the homebrew community and stuff like that. Obviously, content creators like you guys. Uh, yeah, I don't know.
No, it's. I mean, if you think back to, like you touched on it as well about, Saturn kind of laying the foundations for kind of game development that we see kind of today, and I think a lot of the homebrew guys, I think they take a lot of inspiration from the teams at Sega, because if you think about the teams at Sega that were making these insane arcade ports, they were all rookies. Like, again, if you watch Pandemonium's Virtua Cop documentary, like the team that made that was literally a team of guys who were working on their first ever project. They were supervised by Yu Suzuki, who popped his head in the door every now and then and went, "How you doing, boys? Looking good. Keep going." And then out he went. He came back in at the end and went, "No, it has to play good with the controller. Make sure it plays good with a controller, because not everybody will have a light gun." And I'm glad he did, because I don't have a gun from a CRT yet. But yeah, so these kind of crazy development cycles that were done in the Saturn, where they pushed the console to do so much with that really, arcade focused architecture, the two SH2s, VDP1, VDP2. And I think that is an inspiration to the homebrew guys today, because like they're just pushing the envelope. They're trying to find new ways to get more out of the hardware. Like the homebrew stuff that we seen last year, the game that won the Sega Extreme 29th anniversary competition was a game called Cold Case by Jay Barretta. And it's only a couple of levels demo, but it's absolutely brilliant, because what it does is it basically took ideas from two modern games, those being The Medium and Silent Hill. So it's got that kind of foggy, kind of lonely kind of feel about it that Silent Hill's got, but it's also got dual realities. So there's a bit in the game where you walk into a bathroom, it's your bathroom in your apartment, and you look in the mirror and it comes up saying investigate, and you hit A, and he looks in the mirror, and then the camera pans out and it shows you, like, you can see through the walls, all you see is the bathroom, and with the triggers you can rotate the camera and it actually shows you both realities. It's got like the it's not hell, but it's like a demonic reality, and you can see the nice reality and the kind of demonic reality, and then you go into the mirror and you go into that reality, and then as you fight demons and kind of, you know, explore, you pick up Polaroid photographs and you investigate those, and you go into that photograph, and that's the next level that you actually play. So for someone to kind of take that kind of hardware and think that they're going to take two really challenging modern game ideas and merge them into one on the Saturn, I just think it's testament to how much people still want to tap the potential of that machine. Like, there's, with most, same with the Dreamcast as well. Oh, he's got cold case footage. KC, man, where are you? You're like a genie, man. You're just pulling
I've
footage
got
for whatever we're
everything.
talking
I've got
about.
everything.
That's that.
Can't say this enough. Watch the video version of this.
There we go.
We're talking about so many games.
Yeah. I mean, so there's the bathroom there. So as you walk over and investigate the mirror, you can see, if you look in the mirror, the bathroom behind you that's actually clean. It's filthy in the mirror. When you investigate that, you then go into the dirty, kind of hellish, whatever it is. So it's crazy that someone would try and merge those ideas, you know, of dual worlds, like the Medium and then the Silent Hill kind of idea. So yeah, I think that's its kind of relevance today. I think that it's intriguing to people who want to try and get into kind of game development. It's a community that's very welcoming in terms of, you know, ideas. You know, if you want to kind of put something forward, you can certainly do so. As I say, the translation community, we've seen things like, you know, Bulk Slash, which was kind of a team that had Danthrax from Sega Saturn Shiro on it. And they didn't just translate it, they hired voice actors to totally redub the game. And the final version is like something, it looks like a fully professionally translated game. Danthrax has done like a manual, a Western style manual for it. And again, it looks like something that would be in a case for a retail game. So people don't just want to kind of, let's just do a wee homebrew game and just put it out there, or let's do a translation and put it out there. They're wanting to go one step further and actually replicate kind of what was accepted at the time on Saturn. So, you know, in terms of what you're looking at.
I would go one step further and add that people wanna, out of this maybe sounds like not the best of motivations, but in a way it's the best one. They want to prove that the system could do better than people thought it could, right? So the limitations that people point out that the Saturn have, one of the motivations of many of these people that are doing like maybe porting things that were on other systems or creating their own games, one of the motivations is proving that no, that's not true. This was a capable system if you knew how to use it, how to develop for it, and that's interesting. It's not something that you see on a lot of like the homebrew communities around other systems. It's a little bit like it's a constant around like the communities of Sega games or Sega consoles, but I think the Saturn is like the prime example of that, of people wanting to just show off the capabilities that many people claim the system didn't have.
Yeah, we were told by our PlayStation owning friends that the Saturn couldn't do Crash Bandicoot, the Saturn couldn't do Metal Gear Solid, the Saturn couldn't do Final Fantasy VII. And Frogbull is literally showing that yes, you can. And he sent us a build of his Crash Bandicoot demo, and we had it on the channel. And you know, for a tech demo, he's built this for the ground up. You know, so you're absolutely right, Casey. It's people basically who maybe grew up with it back then or are fans of it now that look back and go, What do you mean you can't do that? Yes, we can. So, um, yeah, it's absolutely still relevant. As I said, Sega Saturn has never been more alive than it is now.
Well said. Well said. Okay, Dan, Rav, anything to add to this point? Or
Yeah, so I think, and kind of in my head, and there's a few things that I kind of would like to add, but I think building on what James was saying about the homebrew side, and I think that kind of expands to the appeal of the Sega Saturn to the modern audiences, and to retro gamers, and to not just people that loved it today, but to people that are kind of just discovering it. It's almost like a bridger console, because even most indie games these days, they're very much kind of 8-bit and 16-bit. I think they're more probably 16-bit now than the 8-bit ones. Um, Whereas, and then you've got kind of, you've got the Dreamcast was the first step where it feels like you can play some Dreamcast games now and they just feel modern. That's how ahead of the time the Dreamcast was. And you kind of got the 16-bit and you got the Dreamcast and everything beyond that that feels modern. And when people remake stuff, generally they don't make anything from the Saturn and PS1 era. But you've kind of got the Saturn that is this new frontier of 3D. It's 2D perfection and then kind of new 3D. And you see that with things like the Medium. The Medium is kind of modern ideas implemented on retro hardware. And I think it's part of the Saturn's unique experience and the way that it's set up that kind of brings people in and interests people. It's a console that was infamously challenging to work on. And I think there's more than one kind of member of kind of Sega Extreme or the Saturn, coding community that have said that one of the things that attracted them to the Saturn was kind of the challenge to see what they could get out of it. And I think there is kind of that combination of things. And the Saturn sits in a weird place. That whole generation, the transition from 2D to 3D, the Saturn and N64 kind of straddle a similar line. But I feel like the Saturn embodies it more because it still firmly entrenched in the traditional 2D side, while also having a foot firmly in the 3D side, also being a multi-processor, multi-CPU system, which, at the time, what a nightmare. But today, I'm pretty sure we're all using some sort of electronic device that's got kind of multiple processors at play there. So I think I think that is part of the appeal. The fact that it wasn't as popular and people were discovering it and people were finding out, do you know what, this thing actually did really amazing stuff. There's something enjoyable there. And it's not just, I know that the arcade games are what we love, and there's other games beside that, but it's not just like, all right, so you don't like Virtua Fighter and you may not like Knights, but what do you like? Do you like RPGs? Well, there's loads of those. Do you like action games? Because there's other action games. Do you like beat 'em ups? There's something for everyone. And I think people are discovering that. And I think that's part of what keeps it relevant now. But expanding on that and talking about what is, kind of attracting people to the scene is the fact that it is still, as much as there are these RPG epics on there, and people say, "Oh, Shining Force 3, incredible," and we've got the homebrew versions of that now, all translated. You can experience the whole trilogy. There's that side of it, and then there's the arcade side, and it's still very much a game that has those sensibilities. And you think of something that was successful in the last couple of decades, like The King of Kong. I don't know if anyone's seen that, about the guy that plays Donkey Kong chasing the high score. And that whole, it's basically guy who wants to get a high score on Donkey Kong. And that
okay,
sort of sensibility applies to the Saturn as well, because you look at things like Pandemonium Sega Rally video, where he's talking about people still trying to get the best times on Sega Rally, and then you've got people in the community doing their own speed running challenges. And then last year, just kind of out of the blues, people started competing for high scores in Christmas Nights into Dreams. And then, I thought I was pretty good at the game, and I saw Saturn Dave from Shiro do it, and then I thought, wow, he's amazing. And then I saw Peter Malik of Shiro do it, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this guy is a god. But then people see this kind of competition attracts people, and kind of that competitive scene is very much alive and well in the Saturn scene as well. And whereas I don't think the PlayStation and the N64 and many other games from that era and beyond really have similar games that appeal to that level. You can get races like Ridge Racer and stuff, but you don't get those quick hits, arcade score chasing or time chasing games. None have ever done it like Sega done it, and that's why they're kind of the king of the arcades. So you combine the fact that this Saturn was this unknown console that people are now discovering through various means, and it kind of sits and straddles this line that is quite unlike any other generation, and certainly unlike the other two consoles. And they're discovering that through whether it's the community, whether it's through the library, whether it's through these challenges. And I think that's what keeps it relevant today. And then you attach that with things like, well, Virtua Fighter had such a big influence on the gaming industry, and that's where it first came to the Sega Saturn. And by the way, did you know that Tomb Raider, is one series that is still going today? And despite what you may think, that all started on the Sega Saturn. And you take that, you take those community challenges, you take the homebrew scene, you take the history that people were discovering, you mix it all into a pot, and you get something that I think really does resonate with gamers today. And I think that is why it is not only relevant, but in the modern day, it seems to be thriving.
Mhm. Yeah. The funny thing about Tomb Raider is that I only knew that people considered it like a PlayStation franchise years later. Because for me, living in Portugal, Tomb Raider is a Saturn game. For me, Wipeout was a Saturn franchise as well. So that's
FIFA was the Saturn franchise, and the
FIFA was
Mega
a
Drive franchise.
was a Sega franchise as well, right? So yeah, different reality here in Portugal. But yeah, but I get what you're saying. Okay, Rev, anything to add to this, or can we move on to another topic? Because we but I can see you want to say
I got
anything,
a
something.
I got a bit lost though. So the original topic was the
Yeah,
homebrew games, which I
why is it relevant? So the homebrew scene is
oh
one of the things that keeps it relevant, but not only that, as Dan also mentioned. But yeah,
the
anything to add?
competitions, yeah,
Yeah.
that is something that I enjoy immensely, and I'm sad I do not have a functional Saturn with me to join those. As for homebrew, it is a scene that I appreciate a lot, but ultimately I have nothing to add as I don't follow it
Mhm.
enough. So
Yeah.
let's move on. I'm
Yeah.
sure you'll appreciate that.
Can I just add one more thing before we move on? And
Sure.
that
Sure.
was in the
Sure.
front of my mind. And while I was rambling just now, I completely forgot about it. Online gaming.
Oh yeah.
Online game. There is an
Mhm.
online gaming scene.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's a modem. Online
Yeah.
gaming scene in the Sega Saturn community. This is a game you can still play online, and it plays bloody well. If you've seen mine and James's videos on the subject. So yeah,
Mhm.
another thing that keeps it relevant. You can play this 30-year-old console online over the
Yeah.
internet. Played it against Sega Saturn Dave. On another continent.
Across the pond. So yeah, yeah. It
I mean,
works. It works.
Dan kicked my arse at World Wide Soccer '98. Man, it was a lesson. Argentina versus Italy. I just got dirty and then started kicking the. So that was it's like
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so we don't have in the interest of keeping this like not too long, we're probably gonna skip a few of these. I want to set some time apart for our top 5 at the end. So but I wanted to ask a couple of questions before we get into that. The first one, I actually, this was on the outline. What's a feature or a game on the Saturn that you think was ahead of its time but didn't get enough recognition? So I think one of them was just mentioned
Exactly.
by
That's what I
Dan,
was going to
right?
say.
The online capabilities. I don't know if that was one of the things that you guys considered for this, but I want to. I'll let you go wild with this. Like 5 minutes for this between
No,
the three of you.
it's really really quick. So I had two things in mind when I saw this on your plans, and the two obvious answers are obviously Netlink, which was just mentioned, and pixel art games, which, well, people back then were chasing 3D technology, and mostly, and not many of us really looked at the 2D games. I'd say that most consumers thought it was outdated and didn't really appreciate it
In the
as
West.
they deserve. Yeah, exactly. I meant the West,
Yeah.
and that's been changing now. I feel people are appreciating it a lot more since it's so. Yeah, so those are
Yeah.
the two obvious answers.
A 2D
The only one
powerhouse, right? That didn't get the recognition it deserved back then. Yeah, for sure.
It's quite funny actually because people don't really, as I said before, people don't really make PS1 Saturn era games. They just don't get remasters. You just don't see it. And God, I can't remember his name. Jim Ryan. Jim Ryan was famous for saying recently, "Well, why would you want to play a PlayStation game? They look awful," you know. Um, and there was a view that I can't remember where I read it, but Sega were hesitant to kind of focus on 3D for the Saturn because they didn't think it could do it justice. And I think when you look at what they're doing with the arcades and Model 2, and you compare that to what consoles were doing in the home, and then you connect that to what the view is on those kind of 3D graphics now, you kind of think that they were, in that sense, they were kind of right that they haven't. You look at something, the Model 2 games still look astonishing. You know, Saturn games can look great, but not all Saturn and PlayStation games can look great. Whereas anything in the arcade looks amazing. And I think that kind of Sega were kind of right about that. I think they misjudged the market, but kind of I think they were ahead of the curve in thinking long term, what are these games going to look like?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. James, anything else that you think was either ahead of its time or didn't get enough recognition?
I don't
I think we
the
mentioned a
3D
few, right?
analog
We've
control.
mentioned Virtua Fighter as well, in a way.
I
Or
mean,
it-
I think the 3D analog controller I don't think gets enough credit.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, I think it gets looked at retrospectively as that controller that came with Knights, and I think that does it a hell of a lot of a disservice because you know the hardware inside that, it's got that proprietary chip inside that regulates the inputs to make sure they're razor accurate. The magnets inside, the hall sensors inside the sticks, things like that. Just everything about it is just like you can pick up a 3D controller today, and as long as it's been well looked after, like it'll still be as accurate. There's no stick drift on these. Like Dan, you rebuilt an Xbox controller only the other week. There, an Elite controller, wasn't it, that your son sold you because it had stick drift? It's like you won't find any stick drift, and obviously that stick technology, Sega would then shrink it and use it in that Dreamcast analog stick, which wasn't quite as comfortable to use. But I think the analog controller, it is very unfairly looked at. It's just the Knights pad, and it's just because obviously Knights was what it was bundled with. But it deserves a lot more. It's brilliant for racing games, absolutely phenomenal. It's got a first analog triggers. You can, if you're playing a racing game, you can pressure related. You can ease off the gas, ease onto the accelerator. It just did an awful lot. I know depending on where you live, like N64 technically, yes, was the first controller or console with an analog stick, because just differences in terms of when the consoles came out and across the world compared to the 3D controller. But what that controller did, why it wasn't the design that carried over to the Dreamcast, I will never know. Why they ditched the 6 face buttons. Like, what are you doing? Again, slight tangent, but I think Sega with the Dreamcast, they tried to be a bit too much PlayStation. I think they were too invested in trying to copy a bit of what Sony had done, like the small white box, the big round lid, the diamond shape, A, B, X, Y replacing, triangle, circle, square, and X. Just everything about it, just they kind of lost their way a wee bit. And as much as I love the Dreamcast, I just think it's like, why did you deviate the goddamn pad? Like, the 3D controller is perfect, man. Just refine it a wee bit, maybe shape it and make it more ergonomic. But apart from that, it was spot on. And I just don't think it gets the credit it deserves.
Yeah, I thought of this as well because anyone that I know and have talked to about this and had the 3D pad back in the day, they love it. So I do think that's one of the things that popped into my head when I thought of this question. Yeah, for sure.
That's why
Okay.
Knights feels better on Saturn than anywhere else.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the
Yep.
most accurate pad, and you
Mhm.
have to actually you can get mods on the PC to make it accurate, but yeah, that's I think it doesn't get the recognition that pad for. You compare if you took every Sega Saturn 3D controller and compared it to every N64 3D controller, how many beaten up sticks would you have on the N64 side compared to the Saturn? I think that those Saturn pads are indestructible, whereas the N64 ones are ropey.
Okay. Yeah. We talked about remakes of 3D games specifically, but I also asked you guys which Sega Saturn game do you think deserves a modern remake? And so we actually talked about remasters, which is a little something slightly different, right? I was thinking of Final Fantasy VII, which got a remake or two now, I think, right? Like two
Got
parts.
3 in the pipe.
Okay. But we can go the remaster route if you feel like it. But which Sega Saturn should be remade, remastered, and a brief explanation why?
I wonder if Dan and I might have the same one for this. We might not. I don't, maybe.
Probably similar ones. I've got backups just in case. So you go first, mate.
Well, I think the obvious one is Panzer Dragoon Saga. It's the elephant in the room, isn't it? I mean, all the talk of the source code being lost and doesn't mean you can't just remake the damn thing from scratch. I mean, could you imagine Panzer Dragoon Saga done the way Final Fantasy VII Remake's been done? Could you imagine? I mean, there's Dan's face. No wonder you've got that expression. It's just, that would be unbelievable. You imagine how good those canyons and the waterfalls would look, the battles. Oh man, Azelle would look incredible. Just the battles, the mechanics. The thing is that game still holds up incredibly well. The battle mechanics on that are absolutely phenomenal. The dragon morphing mechanics as well. If your dragon doesn't have the skill set you need for that particular enemy, you can change it. You can make your dragon whatever you want it to be in terms of strength and agility, magic. So it's just amazing game. So that's the obvious one that comes up. It may also help stop people asking $1,000 for a copy of it. Since just ridiculous. But I think that's. See, Dan, I had that one, and another one I had for you. I'm not going to say it in case it's the other one in my head, but I think Panzer Dragoon Saga is the one I thought we would both go for off the bat.
Just a quick question: would you hand it to Atlas, to like the Persona team, or like the what do you call the ones that like the spin-off team for Metaphor?
The ones that make Metaphor.
Yeah, I can't remember. Would you hand it to those guys, or would you be afraid that they would change it and modernize it too much?
I wouldn't be very afraid that they'll modernize it. I think the visual style of Atlas's games are almost incompatible with Panzer Dragoon. They're very much anime, and I'm very recent getting into the Persona games and Metaphor, but I absolutely love those games and I love the look. But they are very much their own thing. I think that they could do something like a Dragon Force that is very much anime. That sort of style. But Panzer Dragoon is very much not of that art style. Its visual design, its aesthetic is tied to kind of Mobius,
Yep.
and that sort of art style. It's not. It's distinctively not anime. Even though it's Japanese origin, it was very much Western influenced. So I don't. I love Atlas, but I wouldn't want Atlas touching it.
Hence my question. Yeah, I was thinking they could be a good fit, but maybe they would change the what made the game so important, so beloved by people. By the way, Studio Zero are the ones behind
That's the one, yeah.
Metaphor, like and P Studio for Persona, obviously. But yeah.
I reckon Ryogo Kotaku could do it. They make
Mhm.
RPGs now.
Okay.
They've made
That's true.
a couple.
Yeah.
and they have that kind of they manage that kind of realistic look.
Yeah.
They're busy
So-
with Virtua Fighter 6, mate.
they make everything for
Streets
Sega.
of Rage
They
4.
make-
Streets of Rage 3D.
and they're making the monkey. They're doing the monkey
The
ball
Monkey
games
Ball,
as well.
exactly.
They do everything.
Okay. So Rav, before we get to Dan,
Right. So I feel like the ship has sailed for this because it's been dying down, but I would say Sakura Wars, because there was a tactical RPG boon a handful of years ago with
Fire
Fire Emblem Three
Emblem, Three
Houses.
Houses. Yeah.
Three Houses, yeah. And after that, there were a bunch of other like big profile, relatively speaking, tactical RPGs like the Tactics Ogre remake and Triangle Strategy and Front Mission and a bunch of. There's clearly a market for those, and there's plenty of very good indie games as well.
You now have
So
like you can go the XCOM route with how they did with Mario and Rabbids, and now
yeah, that one too.
the one that came out recently, Metal Slug
Metal
Tactics.
Slug Tactics, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I think it's still
Yeah, it's
a
still
relevant genre. Yeah.
not as strong, but it
Mhm.
is. Yeah, it's still active. I mean, people are still begging Square Enix for a Final Fantasy Tactics remake to this day. Like every single day, you see lots of people online doing it. So I think the market is there for Sega to capitalize on it and use the Sakura Wars brand as a tactical RPG again instead of the action game from a few years ago.
I like that one, but I think if they released it today, the way they've been promoting games now, the way they've been like getting people hyped up for their games, I think it would have done much better. But I'm not a Sakura Wars connoisseur or anything, but I like
Yeah.
the one they released in 2020.
It's still a very popular. It's a bit niche, but it's still a popular IP, I would say, despite that game. Even though it wasn't really the same thing as the others. Or alternatively, instead of Sakura Wars, we could do a Shining Force 3 remake. So it's still the same idea. It's the same genre. So my spiel applies anyway.
Okay, Dan.
I just thought it wasn't an interesting, or at least a comparable brand recognition wise. Go on, Dan. Sorry.
That's fine. There's an obvious one and there's a less obvious one. I think I'll go for the obvious one at least first. And the obvious one is for me is Burning Rangers, which is probably what James was going to say. Burning Rangers is obviously a game that came late to the Sega Saturn, came out in 1998, made by Sonic Team. Absolutely phenomenal game. I absolutely adore it. I absolutely love the personal side to it. When you rescue civilians from these burning levels, you get fan mail from them, and because of the stages are procedurally generated, there's like 3,000 combinations. There's all sorts of different people that you're sending. You get to live their story. Every time I boot that game up, I'm going into my fan mail, and it's like, oh, it's her again. It's the doctor. It's, oh yeah, I've quit doctor. I've become like a charity worker or something. And this one's like, oh, because of you, I've gone through college, and there's just scripts somewhere. But I'm just like, oh, you know. But the thing is, with the game is, came out early '98. It was made by Sonic Team when they were clearly trying to just get it out the door and focus on Sonic Adventure, which was coming out that year. You know, the Sega Saturn was, you know, on its last legs, you know, commercially, and Sega was just like, look, just get it out. You know, it's one of the last games to come out in the West. So as much as that game is visually impressive for all the effects work it does, it is unfortunately quite buggy visually. And it would there is kind of a fan remake going around, which looks absolutely spectacular. But it really is a game that is quite. It's like Nights into Dreams. It's quite unlike anything else that's out there, and more people deserve to experience it. You know, it's an absolutely phenomenal game, and it really does. It's one of these ones where it's nice to say, right, well, these experiences are unique to Saturn, and they're what make the Sega Saturn special. But by the same token, you want everyone to be able to play these games, kind of regardless of what platform they're playing on in the modern day. So that was kind of my main run.
Great
If I'm allowed
pick.
one more,
Great pick. Yeah.
if I'm allowed one more, it would be Deep Fear.
Okay.
Because that game, absolutely, and another, it's kind of like these, Panzer Dragoon is a 98 game. Shining Force 3 is a 1998 game, at least in the West. So was Burning Rangers, and Deep Fear also came out. Didn't even get an American release. And it's a phenomenal survival horror game, quite unlike anything else. It's very much Resident Evil inspired, but still puts its own twist on it to give you that sense of dread and kind of panic when your air meters kind of dwindling down. And to this day, there still really isn't anything quite like it out there, because the way that it handles tension and everything. Oh, this is the final part of the game, I think, when the with the timer up there. But yeah, the screen is red because you're running out of oxygen. If you fire your gun off, the oxygen's going to deplete faster. It's a fantastic game. I played through it back in '98 with a friend. Well, we played through it together, and then I played through it again. I think it was earlier this year. Just a brilliant game that deserves to be played by more people.
Yeah. This is a good shout as well. Okay. Yeah.
Great shouts, mate. Great shouts.
Excellent. Excellent. I wanted to show something a little bit more exciting, but
This
Yeah.
is exciting.
Yeah.
This part. This is when everything's about to explode.
Doesn't get any more exciting than that.
you get that exactly. Time's running out.
He's getting his
The
harpoon out in
mutations
slow
in this
motion.
game are just like they're grotesque, aren't they, Dan? Like the mutations are, some of them are just horrid, man. It's like there's some really grotesque mutations in this game, but that's a great shout. Another one that gets really overlooked has just been a cheap Resident Evil clone, but those mechanics, topping up the oxygen, manning your gunfire to make sure it doesn't deplete the oxygen any further. Brilliant.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so those are some great picks. I mean, who knows? Sega should at least somewhat acknowledge these like milestone anniversaries for the Saturn and consider doing something with their IPs, but it is what it is. So that brings us, unless anyone else wants to add any other game. No. Okay. So that brings us.
Right, one more.
One more.
Columbo Star.
There he goes.
Okay.
Fighters Megamix. Come on. We need a new Fighters Megamix.
Oh, that
We
would
need
go
a
so
new Fighters
well.
Megamix, or at least a remake of the old one.
I
One of the
mean,
best fighting games of all time.
I agree. I just don't think it would work out because it would have. I think that in order for it to work out, it would have to be like a multiverse or Smash Bros esque like party brawler kind of game, and not a one-on-one classic fighter.
I think it would work. I think if you look at what Sega basically took their two kind of at that time big fighting games and put them against each other. But then if you think of what's come since Last Bronx, like get the Last Bronx guys in there, get the Shenmue guys in there. Can you imagine you could have Lan Di against Ryu? You could finally just avenge your father without sitting through seven discs and then waiting for the third game, and then the fourth game's God knows where. Like, you just pick Lan Di versus Ryu and then just kick the dung at him without having to bother playing the game. You've got your revenge. That's it. It's like, and you could have Ryu versus Kiryu-san. It's like, that's the whole thing.
Yeah, it would work if you could add like all these
Jet Set Radio characters.
Yeah. Exactly. Shinobi, like Joe Musashi. Ai from Super Monkey Ball.
Axel versus Knuckles.
Okay, there we go.
You know,
Yeah. Which
I know-
Axel?
Mate,
The Crazy Texas
there's a
one or
palm
the,
tree.
the Streets of Rage one?
Axel
the
versus
EN2
Axel.
palm tree was in
Yes.
the first game, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah.
You
think
know,
it does work.
the thing. I mean,
I
it does work
think
in
it would
modern
work
day as
because
well.
like people are craving for more like Capcom versus Marvel,
Well,
Marvel
yeah,
versus
but-
Capcom and stuff. So if they're big enough characters, but the thing is they're Sega characters, so that's the issue. Is there a market for this amongst Sega fans? Yes, but enough to I don't
it
know.
would have to be competitively viable, though. Like Fighters Megamix definitely wasn't. Like it was a mishmash of 25 different games put together, and you couldn't get any sort of balance for it to be taken seriously on a competitive sense. And I
It
feel
would
that is a must.
absolutely- It would piss on Super Smash Brothers from the highest of heights. Sega's roster absolutely just annihilates that Nintendo roster. I mean, asking whether it would work or not, Rav, come on, man. He plays a car, the horn that beats the shit out of people with his wee tires. Like, of course it would work.
the AM2 palm tree. Yeah, of course, exactly.
I mean,
You would need. You would need the crappy, like they got the Fire Emblem characters in Smash Bros, and it's like you got like what's his name, Narf or some stupid name
Marth.
with a sword. It's like
Marth,
who
yeah.
is this guy? Who is he? You know, it's
That
not
was his
say you could
introduction
Axe
to the
Battler
West.
or someone from. You could have people from Golden Axe in it. You could have. And the thing is, I think the control works. You know, in Fighters Megamix. You know, Smash Bros is really simple. But Smash Bros is weird, and Smash Bros is really unbalanced as well. People only say, "Oh, yeah, this is only a viable tournament character." It's only because it's got 80 characters that people find something to work. But Fighters Megamix could work the same as that, and I think the 3-button setup, your guard, punch, and kick, just makes it accessible for people. And I think if you handled it right, if you market it right, if you put Sonic the Hedgehog in there rather than Bean and Bark, and if you put kind of people that
Why not all of them?
Yeah, I love Bean and Bark, but
yeah.
you know,
so if
you're
you've
gonna
got a like 80 characters in Smash, why not 80 characters in Fighters Megamix?
No, I would
2K25
definitely
or
love it.
something.
Don't get me wrong. I would love it. I just think that it would have to be done differently for it to work. That's just it.
Could you
That's just it.
imagine if you had like tag teams in it, like Marvel versus Capcom? You had Akira and like BD Joe, but Yunen Hayakataka, yeah, we'll be on our way. And a tag sequence in it. So, I'm seeing this in my
That
head.
reminds me.
Let's
Scary
make
place,
some
by the way.
Bakamitai.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Sega Heroes mobile game, like the puzzle mobile game where you could create a team with like
Sega
the
Heroes.
from Choo Choo Rocket, yeah, the mouse from Choo Choo Rocket with Tom Johnson from Shenmue, and
Can you imagine like
dame dane.
Ryo Hazuki like teaming with Ulala, like I will get my revenge. Choo choo choo.
Hey there, space cats. Hand over the mirror.
this is
The
going
possibilities
south really
are
fast, I think.
are endless here.
Hurry
yeah.
along, easy
Yeah.
right, smack. In fact, that would be the Sega Alley guy has to be the narrator. Round 1, fight, uppercut.
Maybe
Yes, right.
fight. Maybe.
And then everyone presses up over jump.
Yeah. Okay. Sega, just take all of like the past 10 minutes of this show and give us Fighters
Aye.
Megamix.
Take
Next gen.
the last 10 minutes of this podcast and take it to your boardroom at Sega Sammy and just go, look, man, this is the pitch. What do you think? It would have worked in the 90s. They made anything in the 90s, man.
Where do I sign?
Just
Okay, there
kick
you
the
go.
door down with the papers.
Yeah, like
Free money for you guys.
Okay, so let's get into the top 5. So this is like the definitive top 5 Saturn games. One thing that I didn't share with you, so I asked each of you to come up with your personal top 5 Saturn games. However, I neglected to share something. I want to try to create like our collective top 5 out of your personal ones in like 10 to 15 minutes. So
This is
I'm
like one of
sorry,
those
guys.
icebreakers you get whenever you do like a training session, isn't it? It's like you've got
Yeah.
10 minutes.
So first
Go
of
off
all,
in your rooms and have a
first
chat.
of all, no need to explain. Give me your top 5s.
No need to
Okay.
explain that.
No need to explain anything, just the games.
Okay.
So, Rav, you can go first. You clearly have
Okay.
this
So
thought
the,
out.
the 5 games I've got here, that they're there for different reasons, which I was hoping to explain, but apparently that's not happening. I've got
Later.
okay then. I've got Dragon Force, Shining Force 3, Last Bronx, Sega Rally, and Fighters Megamix.
He's got Fighters Megamix after that.
Yes. Somebody, we were having that
That's
conversation, and I was thinking, yeah, yeah, well, I'm gonna name it in a few minutes, and that's gonna suck.
I think that's an instant number 1 here after our conversation. Okay.
Yes.
Dan, what about your top 5?
So imagine if we're going to pull these together and the time points or whatever, I know what's going to be number 1. So Sega Rally for me is 1. Virtua Fighter 2. Panzer Dragoon Saga. Street Fighter Alpha 2. And Nights into Dreams.
Okay, I'm writing these down so I don't forget. Okay. James.
Panzer Dragoon Saga at 5, Knights at 4, Virtua Cop at 3, Virtua Fighter 2 at 2, and Sega Rally Championship. The best game.
Shocker. Okay.
The best game on the
The
system.
best game. Okay. Okay. So there's some overlapping games here. So Sega Rally is on all 3 of your lists. Shocker. Virtua Fighter 2 is on Dan and James's list.
I'm
And
fine
that's about
with
it. Oh, and Knights
yeah.
as well. Yeah, Knights as well. Okay. But the constant here is Sega Rally. So is that number 1? No, I mean number 2. Number 1 is Fighters Megamix, of course.
Aye. Goes without saying, you know.
So Sega Rally. Do you guys agree is like the
Yeah.
like the best or like the most iconic, or not really? Or Virtua Fighter 2?
It's-
Because I can see Dan and James like yeah, but
No, I'm fine with Virtua Fighter 2 instead of Fighters Megamix, so I'm fine with it being number 1. Because I was there is a reason why I chose one over the other, but
more
Virtua
nostalgia
Fighter
based
2
perhaps, right?
but I agree, kinda. I agree that Virtua Fighter 2 should be there, that realistically. So if both of them wanted to be number 1, I am happy with it. And then Sega Rally is number 2.
So instead of
Or the other way around, it's fine.
maybe instead of ordering them 1 to 5, maybe we can just say
Okay.
these are the 5 top games, right? In no particular order. Maybe
So
that
let's
makes it
swap them
easier,
then.
right? So Sega Rally is here
Diplomacy from
because
KC. That's it.
yeah. So you all nominated Sega Rally, so obviously this has
Yeah.
to be in the top 5. Okay. So now I want to know. So maybe the most like obscure ones. Maybe I don't know. What are the ones that are not common to you? So Street Fighter Alpha 2. Dan, any kind of pitch for
Yeah.
this?
So Street Fighter Alpha 2 for me is kind of the pinnacle of the series in 2D and the pinnacle of the kind of the Alpha sub-series. It's an absolutely beautiful game on Sega Saturn. Comes with a bunch of like awesome extras. Pretty much arcade perfect with stuff that the arcade game doesn't have as well. it's the game that kind of, after being wowed with 2D and getting like wow, Sega Rally, Daytona, Virtua Fighter, Nights into Dreams, Panzer Dragoons 5. It's all about 3D, baby. And then someone rented Alpha 2 from the video shop, and we had it for the weekend. They had it on PlayStation, and it was just like, oh my god, this is amazing. Still, Street Fighter's amazing. And then I got it on Saturn, and I was like, oh my god, this is so much better than the crappy PlayStation version. And it's like the game showed me that, for a while I was sucked into the whole everything has to be 3D, and then I played this, and it was like, actually no, 2D is still amazing. In fact, 2D is probably still the best. Um, Brilliant cast of characters, fantastic mechanics. It's pretty much, Alpha One is pretty much the alpha version of this. This is them fully realizing that vision, whereas Alpha 3 is kind of them seemingly don't have that many new ideas, for just pretty much just throw the kitchen sink at it, and it's like, let's have every Street Fighter character, let's have every Street Fighter fighting style. But this is just distilled. It's like pretty much the pinnacle of the series for me. So yeah, that's why it's in my top 5.
Okay, makes sense. Interesting. Um, James, you had Virtua Cop on here.
Yes.
What's your pitch?
My pitch for Virtua Cop is that I think the big three in particular, obviously VF2, Sega Rally, and Virtua Cop, they came at a time when the Saturn was pretty much being maligned by Western media, gaming stores. Just people were already talking down its performance. And I think when you've seen Virtua Cop in the arcade, it's got that very stylized look. It's Model 2, but it's got fully texture mapped areas, but the enemies, they almost look flat shaded with their shades and their kind of black suits on, and it's got the big green target and reticle that goes amber then red. It's just the whole visual look of it just works so well. And of course the way the gameplay works, the camera, the way it flows round, it takes you on a journey through the stages, the music, it's like kind of buddy cop 90s kind of action movie kind of music. It just sets the scene perfectly. Everything about, look at that. That's just beautiful, isn't it? Look at it. I can hear that, well, you picked a shotgun up. The shotgun sounds meaty as hell in that game. It's so good. But it's like, whenever it obviously came with the light gun, the Virtua gun, or the stunner that it was called in the US, and Sega again tried to bring that arcade experience home. They modelled the home gun after the same, mould as the arcade gun. So obviously it's a lot lighter. Found out in later years that they actually left a kind of empty chamber in the handle that you could put batteries in it to weigh it, to give it weight like the arcade gun. If you wanted to open it up, you could actually sit batteries in. They weren't connected to anything, just to give it weight, to make it feel heftier. But everything about it was just, whenever you again take into consideration that it was rookies that made this, what you're seeing here was made by a team on their first ever project in video game development. And that, what you're seeing right now, is what they managed to produce. And it's an incredible replication of the arcade. Ha ha! Pretty bold, aren't we? I'll take care of you myself. There you go. For those who don't get sound, so I'll just add the sound effects in for the boss and myself. But
thank you for that.
Everything about it. No problem at all, Casey. Anytime, mate. But I don't think anybody expected Virtua Cop to look that close to the arcade version, much like with Virtua Fighter 2 and Sega Rally. But I think Virtua Cop was a kind of surprise package out of the three, and it's just so amazingly playable. Like, if you play it with the light gun, like with the controller, it's a bit more difficult to get the kind of 3-hit shot. Whereas with the light gun, there was nothing more satisfying than that. No, you hit them 3 times, flicking the wrist outside the screen after every 3 shots, just getting your chamber full again, just to keep going. Just an absolutely brilliant arcade experience in the home. Time Crisis came out later on, end of '97 on PS1. and it was a decent enough home port, but nah, just couldn't hold a candle to Virtua Cop in terms of just atmosphere and sheer gameplay. So
You've got
yeah,
my vote there.
love
I'm
love
sold.
Virtua Cop,
I'm sold.
and I still I prefer it more. Like Virtua Cop 2, I know Dan's a VC2 man. It's a bigger game, better visuals, branching paths, but I just think the first game's got such an iconic look. And just because obviously I played the first Virtua Cop first, it's stuck in there. So I
Yeah,
just love
yeah,
that first
makes
game.
sense. Okay, okay, that's a good pitch. That's a brilliant pitch, I would say. Rav, you were the one that picked like the more like different. Apart from Sega Rally, you didn't
Yeah.
like have anything in common with the other guys' lists. But so I'll let you pick one that you think really, really should be in the top 5.
Oof.
So Sega Rally
Uh,
is on there because
my list.
all of you
I
talked about
mean, it's I don't know. I am partial towards all of those that I named,
that. Okay.
but I mean,
Which one would be like do you think is the more consensual or the most consensual here are of the other 4 that you made? Dragon Force, Shining Force 3, Last Bronx, Fighters Megamix.
I mean, we're having Virtua Fighter 2, so Fighters Megamix is a bit redundant.
Yeah?
Uh,
Okay. That makes it
last
easier.
Probably not Last Bronx, because the only reason why I put Last Bronx there is because for me it is representative of an era, a late Saturn era, in which it seems like the Sega people had figured out how to port 3D to the Saturn, and so it looks amazing. It looks much better than most PlayStation games, if not all PlayStation games in 3D. But it's a shame that it came really late in the console and when it was pretty much doomed. So yeah, so it's not really a pick for the top 5. I would say I put it there just because of what it represents. The most consensual out of those 5 might be Dragon Force. I feel like that's the one that got the best reactions from them, from the Sega guys earlier today out of these.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean,
Why did you pick Dragon Force?
because for the same reason that I picked Shining Force 3, actually, because it is the kind of game that still really holds up today.
See,
Um,
I'm on your side because I'm trying to convince them by showing them one of their videos on on the game. So maybe that will help.
exactly. I mean, I feel like it's a game that's been holding up really well, like, over
This is
I,
in the game. This is in the game, by the way. This is
yeah,
actual footage of the
that's
game.
what I was gonna
Yeah.
say. Yeah, it plays to the Saturn strengths, like with all those the hundreds of minions on screen at the same time, all those sprites moving around and battling, and there's tons of sound effects and yells and everything. So that's really
This
the
is not the
reason why
time
I
to
put it
learn
there.
about the game. So
It
go
was
watch the
really
video on their channel. Give me a pitch. So, Dragon Force?
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna do too long didn't read off what I just said. I put Dragon Force there because it's a game that plays to the Saturn strengths.
Mhm.
No other console could have done it at the time. It's a really enjoyable game, and it aged like wine. It still looks amazing, and it's
Okay.
a genre that it's a kind of game that I don't think I've seen many games
Mm.
coping.
It's
Honest,
unique, more unique,
yeah,
maybe, right?
I think that the guys who made Unicorn Overlord got some inspiration from it. There are a few things that really reminded me of Dragon Force a lot. Not many though, and that's the only bit.
Vanillaware, then. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably. Probably. Yeah. The people
mean, the
behind,
thing,
I don't know the people, but the studio behind Princess Crown as well on the Saturn. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
So
Dragon Force is Sega Lord X's favourite game. He also
Mhm.
says it's the best game on the Saturn. So, whenever Dan and I spoke with Mel a couple of weeks ago, he kind of you both laid the challenge down that I need to play Dragon Force properly and give it a go. So I'm currently playing through that. I ignored it back in the day. I hate RPGs in the main, so I'm playing through it just now, and I have to do a video on it with my thoughts whenever I've played enough of it. So I'm currently enjoying it very much. Is all I'll say just now. On a weekend game.
so far, if I'm not mistaken, we can all agree that Sega Rally should be on the list. Virtua Fighter 2 should be on the list. Can we agree on Dragon Force?
Oh yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so that's 3. And now we need to pick the other 2. I think a good way to consider this. First, 2 good ways to consider this. First of all, this is your version of the Sega Launch Challenge for this week, and the other way is this could be a way to introduce the Saturn to someone who is not familiar with it at all. So, like a good pick of 5 games that people would enjoy and that showcase the capabilities and the variety of games in the system. Maybe it's just a suggestion. So, Sega Rally, Virtua Fighter 2, Dragon Force. Dan and James, you both nominated Nights into Dreams, right? So this one is common to you guys, and you both nominated Panzer Dragoon Saga. So I don't know. Any Rev? Any of these? Do any of these do anything for you? Do you think they should any of these 2 be on
I
the list?
do not. I'm a bit of an outlier, as in I do not have strong feelings for Panzer Dragoon. It's a genre that I am not much of a fan of,
So
but
in
I
in this
totally.
case, an RPG because they nominated Saga. So
I didn't even know it was an RPG.
yeah,
Just yeah,
so like
just
Panzer. I don't like
yeah.
dragons that fly. So
That's pretty much it. Like it's the flying dragon thing just doesn't appeal to me. And the first 2 games were good.
Nights into
They were
Dreams. Oh,
no,
okay.
I
Oh,
mean the first 2 Panzer Dragoon
okay.
games.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
They were like Space Harrier, but atop a dragoon, wasn't it?
He's like
You go up
Dan
and
and James
down
are
the
like
sides and shoot things.
what's he saying?
I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
I
so no,
understand. I understand. Yeah.
so yeah, bottom line is it is something that doesn't appeal to me, but
So
but I understand that it is good, so
so to
I
put
am fine
things
with
in perspective, we have a rally game, like a racing game. Okay, we have a fighting game, Virtua Fighter 2, and we have a tactical RPG. Yeah, Dragon Force,
yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it?
Yeah, that's the close.
RPG strategy game
It's,
hybrid.
it's like an
Yeah, yeah.
SRPG. Okay,
It's
perhaps
not a traditional strategy RPG, but yeah, let's put it that way. It's the
it
closest to
it
what I
has
get.
elements of strategy RPGs. Okay, it's an RPG with several elements,
Yeah.
different elements. Okay, so to add more variety, I think Nights into Dreams would be a good shout. To be honest,
I agree.
right?
Again, that's another game that I enjoy it. It's not something that I would willingly go back to out of my own volition, but it is I do appreciate that it is very unique and I understand why it's that popular. So I am
Okay,
also fine with it being in the top 5.
and it adds variety to this. Okay, so the
Yeah.
only thing left to decide is what's the last one.
No, that's
So
Panzer Dragoon, really. I mean, I am the exception, and I am fully aware of that. People usually love
but
it.
to be fair, it's another RPG. It's a
Yeah.
different kind of RPG, but it's another RPG. So I'll leave it up to you guys. I don't know.
Take side if you're talking about 5 games to give variety, and as much as I prefer the first game to the second, if we're going to keep a Panzer Dragoon in there, I think you'd have to put Zwei in there. I think you're getting a shooter with deep cinematic cutscenes, great narration, fantastic storytelling. I think that way you're getting a racing game, a fighting game. Knights is its own genre, an RPG, and a shooting game, and you're kind of covering all the bases.
Yeah, I was going to say similar. I was going to say pretty much the same thing. You know, though we're swapping one game that Rav had no interest in for another one that he doesn't really appeal to.
Honestly, I am totally fine with it. That really, I am aware that I am the minority here.
You're
I
the
think
outlier here.
the other
Mhm.
I think the other things that work in Zvi's favor is its graphical showpiece. It's absolutely stunning
Mhm.
looking, and yeah, it is more cinematic than any other game that we've picked. Really, I mean, Virtua Fighter and Sega Rally are arcade games. Virtua Fighter has no endings or anything like that. Dragon Force isn't really cinematic at all. It's all still like anime
Yeah.
images and text boxes and the epic battles. It's amazing, but the world really feels alive in Panzer Dragoons. I think if you want to attract someone from that kind of modern kind of cinematic action game, Panzer Dragoons Vi is the one.
I mean, I haven't played Panzer Dragoon Zwei. I'll be honest, but this is making me feel things. This like just the change in perspective and like the moving camera and stuff. I know the first one had this as well, but this looks like next level. Yeah, I played
Wait
the
to see
first one.
Dan's video next week.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So is this our top 5?
I think
Is
so.
Sega Rally, Virtua Fighter 2, Dragon Force, Nights into Dreams, and a late edition of Panzer Dragoon Zwei?
Yeah. That was a
You wouldn't
nobody
get
his initial
bored if
top
it
five.
was
Yeah.
if that was the only 5 games that you had. You certainly wouldn't be bored.
Okay. This was sort of easy-ish. Okay, so because you were all so well behaved, I'll give you guys a few more minutes to discuss, if you so desire, one guilty pleasure. So a game that you really enjoy playing or enjoyed on the Sega Saturn, that maybe you don't think it's that great, but it has like some like emotional, nostalgic value for you, or no one else likes it, but you do think it's amazing.
I think
I-
I
Yeah.
think if you could say something like you could easily say something like Daytona USA for the reputation it has, but I don't think that's a guilty pleasure. I think that's just a damn good game. Here's my guilty pleasure: Street Fighter the movie. So so the arcade
Now
game. The arcade game is
that
a
is a
mess.
guilty pleasure.
The arcade game is a mess. But the home port is basically Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo with digitized sprites look on. It looks ugly as sin, but it plays pretty well. It plays just like classic Street Fighter. It's got all the moves, most of the characters, and if Street Fighter the movie, the actual movie is a guilty pleasure as well. Look at that.
Yeah, I was going to
that's
say
so
that.
true. Yes.
Oh
There
my
it is on the.
god!
Oh, this was
If you listen
developed
to
by
the,
Acclaim, not Capcom, apparently. Didn't know that.
so this version was actually developed by Capcom.
Yeah.
So
Oh, really? What was Acclaim
the arcade? I think Acclaim might have published it.
published? Maybe. Okay.
I think they might have published it on Saturn and PlayStation. But yeah, this it's not great looking, and Capcom had to lower the resolution to kind of tweak the sprites for characters so that they could more accurately look and play like like their original game counterparts. But deep beneath it, it's quite an enjoyable game, and if you want to relive the jank of the actual movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme in it as well, I go back to it more often than I really should. And spoiler alert, because obviously I'm trying to cover every Street Fighter game on Sega consoles, and with the Mega Drive games out of the way, this is the very next one.
Nice. You heard
Yeah.
it here first, guys.
Yeah.
The title screen as well has got Van Damme saying the name Street Fighter.
Yeah.
It's like
Classic, instant
Like-
classic.
Wait. We've got Kylie Minogue. So
Wow.
there we go. There
it's
you go.
always good. Always good.
She's
But
always
Kylie-
saying the same thing, though. She's always moving her mouth the same way. So yeah, nice, amazing,
It's like
amazing.
so
it's
lucky.
like three frames. Yeah, well, so yeah, but you know, they outsourced the arcade version, and you heard what Dan said. Essentially, Capcom was like, "Yeah, no," and just took matters into their own hands and redid the entire thing in house for the consoles. That's what happened.
And yeah,
Okay.
it plays like Street Fighter, even though it looks drab and ugly. And it plays pretty slow. It's like it's Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, but not as good. Although it did introduce kind of EX moves, which would be a series staple from like the third game onwards. So you know, it's not all bad, but it's definitely in the guilty pleasure department. Like,
I
why
was,
would you play
I
that
was
over
going to
any
say
other
this
game?
in the end, but there shouldn't be anything like a guilty pleasure. If you enjoy, especially in terms of video games, if you enjoy a game, just enjoy it, just own it, and then have fun with it. Games are
I
supposed to be
agree.
fun, so right?
Even yeah, there are no bad games.
Okay, James, guilty pleasure. That's my
So,
comment to
I had
there
a
are
thing-
no bad games. Ravsieg. Yeah, that's like...
Yeah, I had a few in mind, but I think the one I'm going to go with is the Sega touring car.
Ooh, another
Now-
great one. Nice.
So it's like this gets a lot of bad kind of press, so to speak, because yeah, the PAL version, the already low frame rate does make it very difficult to play at times. If you play the NTSC version, that extra 10 hertz of speed makes the world of difference. It still has frame drops, but if you play it with the analog controller and you play in manual transmission and you accept that it's not a drift racing game, it's a grip, it's all about finding the line and gripping it, then there is a really fun racing game to be had in there. And it's also got one of the best soundtracks. Like,
Oh, for sure, hands down.
so high. It's incredible. Like that. All three tracks are amazing, but that opening track, So High by Avex Tracks, it's absolutely incredible. And
On
it's
Liquid
kinda got
Energy.
and Liquid Energy, mate, better than ever. Instant poetry is the but but man, what this I think in the poetry just to kind of get
Yeah.
the line across there, but oh man, I remember at the arcade. I remember hearing like So High playing in the arcade whenever I went in there and I seen it, and like the way the title scene comes across, the kind of the grey and metallic and the yellow and the word in the title scene, it just looked amazing in the arcade. And then like I first seen Sega Touring Car, it was the NTSC version. Me and Sam seen it at CA Games, and about 3 weeks later I bought the PAL game. So Charlie had it running, but it was a Japanese version. And then I bought the PAL version. And I remember getting home and thinking, what the hell's happened, man? It didn't run like this at Charlie's. This is not the same game what's happened. And obviously you realise that it's all 50, 60 hertz thing. But now playing it at 60 hertz with the analog controller in manual transmission, and there was a time attack kind of competition, a community challenge on Shiro. And like Saturn Dave got right into it, man. He got hooked on it, and he was shaving seconds off his times, and he was killing. Oh, you need to understand, it's a grip racer. It's not a drift racer. Don't play it like Sega Rally or Daytona. Like, treat it for what it is. The cars, they want to grip, and whenever you kind of go into that and you go, right, okay, and you adjust your mindset a wee bit, there's a really good racing game there, even for all the technical issues. Why AM3 decided like, or AM Annex it was, to put the rear view mirror in. Like, Mizuguchi knows that the rear view mirror hindered performance, which is why the Sega Rally team took it out. But for some reason, they put it back into the into Sega touring car, and it's as useful as a chocolate teapot, because all you see is like about 2 foot of the track behind you, and it just drops off a cliff. So you barely see anything. It's not as if it's actually useful. Like, so I just play it in third person, folks. It's a lot more enjoyable. But no, there's definitely a really good racing game hiding in amongst all of its issues.
Mhm. Excellent. That's a good pick. Okay. Rav, your turn.
Say it with me, everyone. Dragon Ball Z: The Legend, also known as Dragon Ball Z Idainaru Dragon Ball Densetsu, and also known as Dragon Ball Z La Légende de la Boule de Cristal.
Of course. Of course. We
Yes. By the way, I did find the tweet I mentioned with the Portuguese box with the console and the game, and I put it on the comments. Not sure if you've seen it.
I'm seeing it now. Okay, there we go. Yeah,
And there's
I'll share that.
like there were comments from people saying people also in the games industry, Portuguese now in the UK, saying this is the one I got as well. So yeah, great stuff. There it
Exactly.
Look at
is.
that.
It's
Amazing.
glorious.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
Amazing. Yeah. And the back of it too. Yeah.
So
Uh
so yeah,
would have been like 200 euros
yeah,
today. Like,
that's about right. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. With
So
4
essentially,
playable demos. Free.
yep, that was Sega Flash Volume 3, by the way. I can confirm. So yeah, so the game is obviously not the greatest, but it's very unique. I don't, there's no game that plays anything like that that captures Dragon Ball's essence, in at least not until very recently, in which you just pick a bunch of people and just brawl across a huge 3D space, just send people back and forth and through mountains and stuff, and tearing all those trees down with your key blasts and shit like that. I mean,
That
you know,
that looks like if you ordered Astra Superstars off of AliExpress.
uh, I will take no slander. Okay, so this this game is
It's
actually
Astra Superstars.
It's
have you
it's
played it
3D,
though?
isn't it? I've got it on the shelf there,
So
and
yeah,
it's really interesting because it's like a 3D game in a way, isn't it? Because
it is.
it's a free on free 3D kind of arena
Uh,
fighting game.
yeah,
It's, I much prefer it to the other Dragon Ball Z game, which is basically just a 2D fighter and not a
the
very good
Japanese
one.
one, Shin Butoden. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually. I will say though that I find it pretty good actually. It's just not too memorable, while this one is, well, not only because everyone and their pets had it in Portugal back then, because everyone had a Saturn, and everyone who had a Saturn had this game, because Dragon Ball was even bigger than Sega was in the
Oh
90s
yeah,
in
for
Portugal,
sure.
which is saying a lot. Like this,
Yeah.
Sega and Dragon Ball were I would say the number one and number two cultural names back then. Like they were in
Mhm.
every single household and everyone knew them. So we got this game. It was in French, so I learned some French thanks to the game. uh it had some limitations compared to the Japanese version. Like the Japanese version, when you're watching those cinematics before the battles, you hear some narration explaining what's happening on the plot, blah blah, while the French version has nothing. You only hear the background music, and you watch those slides come in and out. uh there were other cuts but it's essentially the same game. So yeah, it is like those the characters are drawn into these sprites, but as you said, it is a 3D arena. The background is a flat 2D, of course, but there's also 3D elements in there, like mountains and trees, and even the attacks, like the energy attacks, are all 3D as well. This game is fun. You can beat it in like 3-4 hours, but there is something that brings you back to it, because you get like a rating at the end of each chapter that rates how close you were to the actual story. Like, for example, if you fight against Frieza and you take Krillin in and you just murder Frieza with Krillin, you're gonna get a mark, because that's definitely not what happened.
Okay.
So
Makes
yeah,
sense. Makes
so
sense.
yeah, so you have to do those things. You have to let Frieza kill Krillin, and then Goku turns into Super Saiyan, and then you kill Frieza with only Goku, and that's it. And
Okay.
that's how you get the 100% rating. Uh, it goes through the beginning to the end of Dragon Ball Z, by the way. And when it came out, I'm not sure about France, because France had it earlier than Portugal. I don't mean the game; I mean the actual
The anime.
anime. Yeah, exactly, because our version was based off the French one,
Uh-huh.
and you know
Yeah.
that it is. Uh, but when we got the game, I'm pretty sure that Portugal was only
Was
around like
behind, yeah.
it was only like in the Android saga, so it
Maybe
spoiled
not
a
even that
lot of. Yeah, I know
far
that
into it,
when I
maybe.
got the game,
Oh,
I
okay.
know that when I got the game,
Yeah.
it was the anime in Portugal wasn't at the Cell saga.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
and this was a while after the game came out, so it was definitely early. Um,
So a good
yeah, so
shot.
it
Yeah.
spoiled. Yeah, it spoiled a lot of people, because by the time we saw Gotenks and Boo and stuff on TV, we were like, yeah, we've already seen them in the game. uh,
Awesome.
and yeah, it
Okay.
is a pretty enjoyable game, honestly. I could almost though all the music still plays in my mind. I still remember every single special move from every single character. I could probably tell you how the entire story mode goes step by step. I just played it to death. The game was just fun. I
Okay.
mean, it's not great in hindsight, but it was really fun, especially for a Dragon Ball fan. I recommend
Awesome.
it.
Awesome. Okay. That's our final guilty pleasure of the show. People watching the video version of this probably realize that James is no longer with us. But so he had some family issues. No, not like that, Ravsieg, not like that. He's no longer in the room in the recording, but he had to attend some family matters. However, his presence on the show is really appreciated. And so, Dan, it's up to you to carry us over to the end of this by telling the good people listening slash watching, how can people and where can people find the Sega guys? That's the final question.
The Sega guys. The Sega guys are predominantly on YouTube. That's where most of our content goes these days. So yeah, we've been on YouTube for a couple of years now. Just coming up to 8,500 subscribers. Would love to get 10,000 by the new year, but we'll see if that's achievable. But yeah, on there you'll get our video versions of our podcasts, and then you'll get kind of assorted retrospectives, news coverage, and all sorts of stuff. You can also find us on Radio Sega. That's where our audio podcast premieres every Monday night at 6 p.m. We're on social media. You can just find us under our, Dan the Mega Driver, James the SEGAHolic, and the Sega guys on various social media feeds. I won't list them all because everyone's kind of migrating away from some and onto others at the moment. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's where you can
They'll be
find
in
us.
the show notes. So yeah, just look for them there. Okay. Anything specific you want to mention in terms of like content that's coming up?
Yeah, so this is the fourth podcast we've been doing that talks about the Sega Saturn. So just this week we did save our Saturn that came out a few days ago as of the recording of this video, which is we talk about the AliExpress Saturns and how you can preserve your console. And then we'll have our Saturn Memories 30th anniversary, and then we've got Sega Lord X on to talk about the best Sega Saturn exclusives, and we've got a host of other content coming on. Panzer Dragoons Vi is our big retrospective that comes out, probably out by the time this airs, and a few other things. Hopefully, a Virtua Fighter 2 retrospective if we can get it all edited. But we've got plenty of other stuff coming down the pipe as well.
Excellent. So do give the guys your hard-earned subscription, maybe. And thank you, Dan, and also James for joining us. It wouldn't have been the same without you guys here. Like I said before, same goes to you, Rav. But when I thought of people to come on this episode and discuss the Saturn, it had to be the three of you. Yeah, Rav, where can people find you?
So people can find me on. I still have to migrate to newer social media platforms, but you can find me on Discord, on X, on Instagram, and even on the consoles, the PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, whatever, as Ravsieg. So that's Ravsieg. I hang around most, especially Radio Sega's Discord channel. I'm in a bunch more. Feel free to message me if you see me. Although I don't tend to participate in many others because
Time.
days aren't long enough. Which is the reason life is the reason why I haven't launched the project I've been thinking about for the last like 3-4 years, in which I intend to share my video game experiences to the world. Kind of what I said here, like the experience that how someone from a small lower class town in a country that's outside the richest group lived and grew with games. So uh, I hope to get that running someday, but life hasn't let me. So if you're interested in hearing more about these that we've discussed today and the experiences I've mentioned today, follow me on X or Twitter or whatever platforms I'll join, because at some point this might be happening, or I hope it is happening. Um,
Yeah.
that's that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good a good pitch there. Yeah. So all the links again will be in the show notes. Oh, there's something that you forgot.
Just
Yes.
one thing. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. So to the guy that I mentioned like almost 3 hours ago, the one that went to Kurt Circuit to say that the Saturn, or Portugal rather, was the place where the Saturn had the most success except Japan. If you're listening to this, please get in touch with me, because I've been looking for you for years and I have no idea who you are. Yeah, and
Or if
nobody
anyone
knows.
knows who that person is,
Exactly.
let Ravsieg know. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, because I'm really curious to know what kind of other things you know about that era and how
Yeah.
Portugal
Yeah.
dealt
Would,
with
it would be the dream would be to find people from like Sega Portugal from
Yeah,
Echo Films. Yeah.
and even really reputable like journalists, video game
They
journalists in
struggle
Portugal.
to find people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen an article from Público, which by the way then is like one of Portugal's top newspapers. It's like number 2 or number 3 highest selling. That they had an article a few years ago on the company that acted as Sega of Portugal, saying that it's really a mystery why nobody from that time is ever willing to talk to anybody, and why there's
They just want
absolutely
to
no
repress those memories.
yeah,
So
and
traumatic.
so, but the thing is that it's really disappointing because for years
Yeah.
now, and
Mhm.
I've done this for at least 10 years. I've been trying to tell people over the internet that the Saturn was huge in Portugal, and that and what essentially what it means to us, and nobody ever believes me, and I do not have the stats to back it
Yeah.
because Echo Films never shared any of those. It's a mystery. We know that. I mean, I know that pretty much everyone in my school had a Saturn, but I'm not able to prove it.
Yeah.
It's annoying.
Hopefully one day
Uh,
we'll have
yeah,
someone who's willing to share more information
yeah,
about that.
exactly. I'm
Yeah.
so I'm s- yeah. I mean, and then there's those groups on Facebook that I mentioned, but I'm dragging, but they won't be talking to international media either. So, anyways, okay, I'm dragging this for way too long.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. It's okay. So again, thank you guys for joining me. Thank you to everyone who listened to this and or watched the video version. If you're listening, go watch the video version to get like a feel of some of the games that we talked about and the strong feelings behind them by these three amazing Sega fans. As for the Sega Lounge, we'll return next week with the news roundup. So do join us then for the latest in terms of Sega news and some interesting banter and comments on that. We have a lot more content coming until the end of the season, which is coming next month. It's very close, but including a couple of special episodes that I'm very excited to share more about when the time comes. Until then, follow us on socials, mostly at thesegalounge.com on Blue Sky these days for some reason, but also X and the other places I'm around as well. Feel free to reach out if you want. Thank you very much for watching/listening. Dan, Rav, and James as well. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been a blast. Bye
Been a pleasure.
bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. The Sega Lounge, hosted by me, KC, and part of Radio Sega's network of live shows and podcasts. Theme song and incidental music by OSC. Got any suggestions? Drop me an email to podcast@thesegalounge.com. Find us at The Sega Lounge on X, Twitter, and Instagram, at thesegalounge.com on Blue Sky, and be sure to check out our Twitch and YouTube channel for live video content. You can find previous episodes of the show by going to thesegalounge.com, on the Terra Player app, and wherever you listen to podcasts. A Mixed On Productions podcast.